Everybody, welcome in. We are so excited to have you joining us for day 2 of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Tree Canopy Funding and Policy Roundtable. My name is Sarah Sewell. I am with ReLeaf, and I am going to be your MC. I had a great session yesterday talking about some climate and tree canopy solutions, and also talking about how we can mitigate the loss of tree canopy throughout the watershed as well. Today, we're talking equity and next steps to drive local action. But before we get there, let's just review some brief housekeeping for folks who maybe weren't on the line yesterday, or if folks just kind of need a brief refresher. But yes, come on in. We're excited to have you with us. Participant lines are muted during presentations and will be unmuted during the discussion groups. We still want to hear from you though, so do keep your comments and questions coming in the chat box throughout today's activities. Quick reminder, we all do inhabit human bodies, and so if you need a break, water, bathroom, whatever, please do take one. Our only scheduled break today is lunch, and so please do take breaks as needed. Also, feel free to connect with everybody else on the line. You can act like this is an in-person event, right? Where you have kind of hallway conversations and you kind of talk to somebody right after they've presented and you're like, hey, this is so great. Do make use of the private messaging function in your chat box. Just know that those messages won't be saved and recorded like the messages in the main chat will be. And so speaking of recording, this event is being recorded. You probably just got that notification as well. Know that the main chat and the main event is going to be recorded so that we can share that with a wider audience out after the event has closed. And the breakout rooms are being recorded just for note-taking purposes. So those will not be shared out. So you can feel free to have open discussion in those breakout rooms. All right, back to our agenda for today. Today's morning sessions will focus on incorporating equity into all aspects of tree canopy funding and policy work. And so the afternoon sessions, they'll kind of weave it all together by honing in on the solutions pathways, cutting across all of the themes of tree loss mitigation, climate, informed planning, and equity. We'll roll up our sleeves this afternoon, so get ready for that. For some state-by-state work, so that you all can start to identify and pinpoint the action strategies that you deem worth pursuing in the coming few years. And so, the whole goal of the roundtable to kind of remind everybody and get everybody on the same page are to coalesce around funding, policy, and programmatic solutions that will help restore, enhance, and expand and keep sustainable the Chesapeake Bay tree canopy. All right, so to see how alert everybody is, our project team has set up a really fun poll for us this morning. So we're going to test our knowledge on some state trees. So I will be taking the guess right along with all of you. The poll is, which of the following is the state tree of more than one Chesapeake Bay jurisdiction? Ooh. This is a good question. Is it the American holly? Is it the flowering dogwood? Is it the eastern hemlock? Is it the scarlet oak? How about the sugar maple or the white oak? You guys got to make your selections, okay? You got to know we're not helping anybody in the chat, all right? We're being alert and we're going to figure it out. And we're gonna see what our best guesses yield us here. All right, and yes, no Googling. Thank you, Crystal. And we'll see what everybody comes back with. All right, so most folks said the flowering dogwood. And while the dogwood is a favorite for many people for many reasons, it's actually the sugar maple. It's nuts. It's actually the sugar maple. So we learn something new every day. Thank you all for your participation in that quick poll. And with that, we are, the sugar, I know, it's wild. With that, we are really excited to get into our morning keynote this morning. So our morning keynote this morning is unique. It is a jointly delivered address from stakeholders in Richmond, Virginia, doing some really killer equity-driven tree canopy restoration and expansion. Jeremy Hoffman is a scientist with Virginia Commonwealth University, and Sheri Shannon is co-founder of Southside ReLeaf. And together they'll be sharing how urban heat mapping and the community-led restoration work has ignited a new promise to extend the benefits of trees to all Richmond's residents. And so very excited to have them joining us. Great example of what partnership and action looks like in the watershed. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeremy and Sheri.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. I am really, really happy to kind of kick us off here. Sheri and I have been kind of shopping this talk around like a traveling experience. So we're excited to share with you a little bit of kind of like what we think is, well, so first I'll say that the heat island and the urban heat threats that I'm going to share with you are completely trans-jurisdictional. They exist basically everywhere. Okay, so the same patterns, the same people showing up in our analyses of who's getting sick during heat waves, all of that is virtually the same. But what I think you're going to hear, especially from Sheri, is just how we have worked with our community to figure out what the best and most relevant solutions are, and get acting on it. So while the threats are the same, just basically everywhere, the approaches need to be tailored to the individual and developed by the individuals in any given place. So hopefully this is inspiring to you. It's been really inspiring to work with Sheri over the last few years and kind of get to work on this community-driven approach to mitigating urban heat. So with that, please, next slide. As many of you know, the climate is changing. We have the warmest years on record in the Chesapeake Bay region. The winter of 2022 into 2023 was record heat. The pollen started shooting off in early February. So we all know that this is going on. It's been 100% unequivocally linked to the heat trapping gases emitted from human activities like burning coal, oil, and gas. This has cascading impacts to a variety of different aspects of our day-to-day lives, from the food that we eat to the way that we get around our cities. And the future of those sorts of shared experiences that we have between generations. So next slide. We also know that the impacts are not just around global warming. So you think of global warming, but we know that they're distributed among a variety of different aspects of the climate that we've enjoyed in the Chesapeake Bay region. Specifically, hotter, wetter, sneezier, and wheezier. We can distill all those big climate reports down into just a few emojis and kind of think about how climate change impacts us on the ground level. We'll talk a lot about hot here today, wetter in the sense that the atmosphere becomes a bigger sponge as it gets warmer, so it can hold more water. It dumps more rainfall over the same area in a shorter amount of time, causing lots of flooding that we've seen. At the same time, sea level rise brought on by melting ice sheets, as well as the ocean actually warming up. It expands as it warms up. Those two things are causing some of the global sea level rise locally here in the Chesapeake Bay region. We also have subsidence occurring through groundwater extraction, as well as relaxation of the Earth's crust since the end of the last ice age, which is super long term and very, very slow. And then sneezier and wheezier are those direct impacts to our public health. Sneezier, everybody has felt the pine and the oak pollen getting out and around. You've seen the yellow dust on your car. That is the early pollen season. And so we've shown here in Richmond that the pollen season has shown up stronger, about 20% stronger than in the 1980s, and it's peaking about a week and a half earlier than it was in the 1980s. This disproportionately impacts children, of course, because they breathe more air per unit body mass than adults do. And then wheezier climate, those big fires that continually burn every summer on the other end of the continent, basically send smoke in a big river of air across the country, and then that can subside into central Virginia. And in the summer of 2021, we actually had the worst air quality that we've experienced in like 20 years because of the smoke from a wildfire 3,000 miles away. So the impacts of climate change are really, really direct. They're also challenging to infrastructure, public health, a variety of different aspects, including our economy. But I want to talk a little bit more now about the hotter sense. Next slide, please. Extreme heat kills more people than any other weather-related hazard. This is weird because you tend to hear about hurricanes and tornadoes and floods on the news because they're way more charismatic. They are a thing happening in space and time that we can see and we name, and we have the newscaster out in the wind going, oh, I'm out here on 4th Street, and a heat wave is really different. Heat waves happen over a much larger space geographically, and they have weird thresholds everywhere. So that leads to a real crisis around how to communicate the risks associated with extreme heat. Next slide, please. And we know that the crisis of communication actually has a disproportionate effect on elderly and communities of color and communities that have chronic health issues, both heat-related illnesses and then those ones that are made worse by heat, things like asthma, which also disproportionately impact communities of color for a variety of reasons that we'll get into today a little bit. But we didn't learn that better than in Chicago, Illinois, 1995, summertime, 800 people died, disproportionately high rates in elderly communities of color that had been substantially fractionated and had very low amounts of social infrastructure by which to communicate risk and to get help when needed. Next slide, please. We also know that heat doesn't treat everywhere the same way. So a heat wave, great. But we know that the built environment can have a huge impact on what that feels like, depending on where you live. So in the chat, folks, I need you to write on 3, type in the chat where, if Sheri and I were the Frizzles and we were in the magic school bus and we were to fly into this photo, type into the chat. And don't press enter yet, but on 3, I want you to say where you're going to go to touch the hottest surface. Okay, so in the chat, write what the hottest surface in this picture is. Don't press enter yet. On 3, you're going to do it, okay? Make your hypothesis. You've got a scientist from the Science Museum on this call. We got to make some hypotheses. All right, on 3, 1, 2, 3. Nice. Oh, this is very attentive. It is. Everybody must have had their coffee this morning. All right, great. We have a whole bunch of different ideas here. This is, I love how a variety of different hypotheses are good. Now, how about on the flip side of that, the other extreme, where are you going to go to touch the coolest surface to the touch? All right, put it in the chat. And then on 3, press enter. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Way more of a consensus almost immediately and that happens to be the case in every single time we do this, Sheri. It's like the same, it's a variety of answers for the hottest, but the coolest is almost always under the tree or shade. So what we can do is actually, with science, we can investigate how these patterns actually look in the real world. So you can attach a thermal camera to my phone and then go out and actually take pictures of the built environment. And by taking pictures of everywhere all the time, we can actually get a really good idea of the neighborhoods and places that are disproportionately hotter. So in this photo, the warmer places are the brighter colors and the cooler places are the darker colors. So many of you were absolutely correct. Anywhere under the shade generally is going to be the coolest place. Those dark, hard, thick, tarry asphalts, those absorb more of the sun's energy relative to all these other surfaces and then re-emit it back into the air as heat throughout the afternoon and into the evening. And there's a very low albedo surface, or the reflectivity is very, very low. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in this picture that I could quite literally talk for this entire 9 to 3 p.m. day about this picture. And my students at VCU would tell you that I can, that all of these different surfaces have an interesting story, including the colors of the cars, as well as the different types of vegetation. You can see the non-native grasses are as hot as the sidewalk during this heat wave. So grass lawn can be as bad as an impervious surface during a heat wave. And then the type of building material, these very high albedo marble benches that we have, or we had around the Science Museum's campus, were very reflective and could actually feel cool to the touch, even though they're in direct sunlight. Next slide. So what we wanted to do in 2017 was to get an idea. Well, okay, so the surface temperatures, we all know that you're not going to, that change in temperature doesn't actually reflect what we feel. So we needed to go out and actually measure the temperature in our city. So we put thermometers on our cars. We've now done this in like 65 cities around the country. It's now funded by NOAA's Climate Program Office, and now the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, or NIHIS. But we got it started here in Richmond. And the big thing that we did differently than previous campaigns had done was to recruit volunteers from community nonprofits that were already doing really important green space work. So in this case, it was Groundwork RVA. This is Ajana James, who was a junior at this time. She's now, I think, in her last year of college or something. Like, she's, it's just amazing to see teenagers from this group, Groundwork RVA, which has a stated mission to realize racial equity through improving green space access, to improve the health and wellness of everyone in Richmond. To see these teen members transformed into scientists in these campaigns. We went out in July. It was hot. Felt like you were walking around outside in someone else's mouth. It was 100 degrees at the airport, but we found next slide, please. We found a 16-degree Fahrenheit difference between the coolest and warmest place in Richmond at the exact same time at the hottest part of the day. So 16-degree Fahrenheit difference is as big or bigger than some places in Richmond saw over the course of the whole day. So within the city, there was a higher variability in temperature than some places felt over the course of the whole diurnal cycle, which is really incredible. Next slide. We've also found that these places overlap in pretty much one-to-one with higher rates of heat-related illness responses from the Richmond Ambulance Authority. We just got IRB approval to do this place-by-place analysis, which is going to be really important for assigning and figuring out best place-based interventions that we can do for heat-related illnesses. But this is the correspondence. This is stronger than chance, even when you correct for things like population density. Next slide. We also found that this uncovers a really important environmental justice story here in Richmond. So by disaggregating that information, just like in Chicago, where we knew that a bunch of people got sick, a bunch of people died, if you don't disaggregate that by race, you miss an underlying you potentially miss an underlying story. So by disaggregating those ambulance authority data by race, we saw that a higher percentage of Black residents were being attended to by the Richmond Ambulance Authority than and a lower percentage of white residents compared to their total population in Richmond. So this disproportionate impact is exactly what we mean when we talk about environmental justice, disproportionate impacts. Okay. Next slide, please. We also know that this is not going away. In 2022, we had over 2,500 heat-related illnesses in Virginia. Many of those higher rates tend to also be in places like cities. We know that this is the case basically, across the Commonwealth. So it's a very important thing for us to start thinking about how we understand the public health burden and the ways that we can attend to our communities more efficiently when it comes to these heat-related threats, because we know heat isn't going to go away. It's been a part of a Southern culture. It's going to continue to be. And as global warming makes heat waves more frequent and more extreme, we need to be doing things right now to prepare our communities for the future. Next slide, please. So we also know that there is a history behind the present day. To just say, oh my gosh, that pattern looks really interesting, that strange red boomerang of heat. Like what, one of my colleagues, Duran Chavis, took one look at the map and he said, that looks like the redlining map. And so he had already been looking at things like vacant lots, and basically these redlining maps on the right look like just about every other socioeconomic indicator in any American city. If you don't know anything about redlining, basically it was a practice for the Federal Housing Authority to deny access to wealth building, and the red areas got the worst rating and were basically denied access to wealth building tools for things like housing. We investigated our heat island data through that lens, not only in Richmond, but around the rest of the country. Next slide, please. This work was featured in the New York Times. Next slide, please. We saw that the formerly redlined areas were definitely warmer in Richmond. You can see places like Jackson Ward, that was the Harlem of the South, and Maggie Walker's, first woman Black-owned bank in America at the time, across just a few miles away in Windsor Farms, significantly cooler. Those folks were referred to as the best people, by the way, in the handwritten notes of those neighborhoods. Next slide. Those places, the formerly redlined areas, also tend to be dominated by impervious surfaces. That makes flooding much more intense as well under higher rates of precipitation. Next slide, please. And the most important thing to this discussion, there is far fewer trees in these formerly redlined areas. Next slide, please. In 94% of the cities that are in the redlining database, 250 of them, that same pattern was found. And subsequent studies have found air quality differences, flooding differences, health outcome, including things like gun violence and COVID-19, are differentially higher in these formerly redlined areas than the non-redlined counterparts. Next slide, please. So in a way, even without climate change in the picture, people within our own cities, our neighbors, were already experiencing a hotter, wetter, sneezier, and wheezier climate than other parts of the same city. Next slide, please. So what are the options that we have? Well, there are two main buckets: mitigation and management. Mitigation actually means to turn down the temperature. Let's actually cool off our cities. And the management is, how do we actually respond to the acute threats? Next slide. A combination of these things, both the built environment and the way that our governance structures are set up to protect the most vulnerable in our cities, are needed. So we need to make not only built environment changes, expanding things like tree canopy, as well as a variety of other things that we can be doing, and undergirding the social systems in our communities to protect those that are most exposed and differentially vulnerable to it. So I'm going to hand it over here to Sheri, who's going to run us through what we've actually been doing to do those very two things. Sheri, please.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for providing that historical context. I will say that probably one of the most important things that we've done with this data, at least on a personal front, is I co-founded Southside ReLeaf, which is an environmental justice organization that actually works to improve health outcomes and the quality of life for South Richmond residents, in which my co-founder and I started this in 2019. And so we were both part of the city's master planning process. And we saw that there is a shorter life expectancy, up to 20 years for folks in the city, including South Richmond. We saw that there were higher rates of chronic illnesses and diseases. And on top of that, we noticed that not everyone in our neighborhoods live within a 10-minute walk to a green space. And so looking at this data through the master planning process and what Jeremy has shared today, we were like, we have to do something. And so next slide, please. Within the first year of our formation, working with the city's green team, using the Climate Equity Index, we were able to kind of raise hell about why we have so few green spaces in South Richmond. And so in 2020, the mayor announced the creation of 5 new green spaces in Richmond Southside. And quote, he said, "With the help of outstanding community experts, we've made an intentional effort to designate the first new park spaces since the 1970s in communities of color. And we're asking the community what they want to see in those spaces, thanks to organizations like Southside ReLeaf." Next slide. Additionally, we've been able to secure collectively secure millions of dollars in new funding. And so it's for a range of things. It's for planting projects, it's for planning, it's to increase capacity, everything from our community assets and libraries, places of worships, community centers, all the way through the work that Jeremy has been doing at the Science Museum with community science and our other community partners. We've been able to use this data to get grant funding to actually start planning, planting, and executing a lot of this work. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, thanks. Something else. So Jeremy has showed what the maps look like in the city of Richmond. But the cool thing is we've expanded this work to other cities. And so the Virginia Foundation for Independent Colleges in 2021 worked with 200 volunteers, and volunteers, I feel, is so loose, right? We are talking about students, faculty members, folks in our neighborhoods. They went out across 10 cities on this one date and they mapped what the temperature was. And they started to also see something that was very similar across the city of Richmond, is that areas in which there were more impervious surfaces, it was hotter compared to areas in which there were more canopy cover and green spaces. Next slide. Additionally, as Jeremy pointed out, we also are talking about air quality as well. And so our academic and cultural institutions at the Science Museum and other community partners, again, are continuing this momentum of community science through, and this is the RVA Air program, in which folks are actually going out and they're measuring the particulate matter across areas of the city. We also have monitors in the city as well, in which they are actively collecting a lot of this data. Next slide. And probably one of my favorite things to come out of all of this is all of the amazing partnerships. And you see, kind of a smorgasbord of logos here. That's not even that's just a tiny sampling of all of the groups really have come together throughout this process. We have orgs like Chesapeake Bay Foundation, who's been really critical in helping to green Southside. As Jeremy pointed out, Happily Natural Day with some of our urban agriculture and urban farmers, Groundwork RVA, with our youth involvement there. And then, of course, there's the city itself with Parks and Recreation and Department of Public Utilities. And of course, I can't forget to shout out the Department of Forestry. Our community foresters have been incredible in helping with a lot of our planning processes, especially when it comes to planting, and a lot of that community outreach as well. And so what has been great is that because of this data, because everyone is noticing what's happening in their neighborhoods, we are able to articulate what we are seeing historically, and get that funding. We're able to collaborate in many ways across different areas in order to tackle these challenges when it comes to urban heat islands. Next slide. And this map, Jeremy, we got to update this map because we just had 2 new tree plantings already over the winter. We have community-driven tree projects across the city, and you can see where the stars are located. A lot of them, it's intentional, where we are planting in formerly redlined communities. And something I do want to highlight as well, for a lot of these projects, we are working not only just from grass tops and nonprofits, but civic associations, PTAs, high school students. This is a community effort. We want to make sure that this is not just a one and done type of thing. We don't just go into communities, plant trees, build community gardens, and then walk away. We want to make sure that there is longevity and sustainable successes really for a lot of this work. And so next presentation we do, Jeremy, we're going to add those additional stars because we are cranking it out over here in the city of Richmond. Next slide. I want to highlight what we have found, we meaning Southside ReLeaf in particular, over the last, I guess, 3 going on 4 years of our formation. there are essentially three tenets of our work, and that's to plant, educate, and advocate. And so what you see right here is some photos of our tree plantings that we did in partnership with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Parks and Recreation, Groundwork RVA, and other community members, in which we planted 100 trees at Hickory Hill Community Center, and then we had 75 trees at Swansboro Playground. Again, recognizing that we are not only focusing our planting and greening efforts in South Richmond in areas that have been formerly redlined, but we also want to make sure that we are greening spaces that are community assets. So we are intentional about going into community centers, public libraries, and playgrounds as well. Next slide. Here is Broad Rock Public Library. And I always want to shout out Broad Rock because a lot of people, even within the city, don't realize that this is the only library that's available across two city districts in the 8th and 9th districts. And that those are areas where we are seeing the highest concentrations of poverty, where those they've been zoned for industrial and commercial use as well. We have higher rates of asthma. So the Department of Public Utilities, through their RVA H2O campaign and working with the James River Association, they got funding to green public libraries. And this is the one public library that we have in that area of South Richmond, in which they de-paved a lot of surfaces. They added permeable pavement to help with stormwater runoff. There's trees, there's a lot of natives, there's a pollinator garden. What's really cool about this is the one day I was out there, there was a mom and her son, and he was just pointing, and he's like, oh my gosh, look at this, look at this, look at this. And they were able to explore this space from an educational standpoint. And I absolutely love that. And I want to encourage everyone to continue, when you're planning these projects and you're thinking of urban design, like how the community is going to interact and engage with those spaces. Next slide. The second part, when I talk about education, so here in the top left, we have Gabby from CBF, and then Amy in the yellow, who's my co-founder. We are out in the community. Part of our efforts is to make sure that we are talking about the importance of greening. One of the groups and the efforts that we have originally started is the Greening Working Group, which is comprised of about 18 to 20 community members in South Richmond. And we've been meeting for more than a year and a half now. And we've talked about everything from redlining and urban renewal to green infrastructure to urban forestry. We've talked about urban farming and agriculture. And we find all of that to be very important because knowledge is power. And when folks are able to have the vocabulary, they're able to learn about how their community has been designed and how they have the power to shape their neighborhoods into what they want it to look like, we'll be able to tackle a lot of these challenges that we see, especially when it comes to the social determinants of health. Next slide. And then this advocacy piece. So while we've, you see the green and the lush and all the great, it's great, but we still have some systemic issues that we have to tackle. So in the top left, you see flooding. This is Maury Street. This is not uncommon, right? This does not just happen because of a hurricane. Our stormwater systems are overworked, as Jeremy said, like we are looking at wetter and more frequent storms and seasons. And unfortunately, because we have outdated infrastructure systems and not a lot of green spaces in South Richmond, we see this type of flooding here. On the right, I always, point out this gentleman who's walking down the street. He actually was going to a bus stop. You don't see any trees here. You don't even see bus shelters. And on top of that, for a lot of trees that have been planted, a lot of street trees that have been planted, they aren't always maintained, whether it's because our urban forestry division is underfunded or under-resourced, or we've just had some bad partners in the past who've gone into communities, they decided to plant, and then they walked away without doing any maintenance or having any long-term watering plans. So these are some of the issues that we are still trying to tackle. And if you notice, I'm not just talking about green spaces, I'm talking about transportation, mobility, accessibility, just your everyday quality of life that we want to focus on improving for Southside residents. Next slide. Now, having said all of that, right, I do want to shout out our wins. So Southside ReLeaf, because of our amazing partners as well, we have planted and given away more than 850 trees in the last 3 years and hosted more than 30 community events as well. We have the creation of 5 new parks in South Richmond. We just need a commitment from our city leaders to actually fund those parks so we can bring them online. We were successful in creating an urban forester as well. So that's another thing. When we're talking about urban design and planning and doing a lot of this work, sometimes our local governments don't even have the right personnel at the city or county level to actually manage and plan and envision what our spaces should look like. And so we were able to secure funding to hire an urban forester for the city of Richmond. We also launched the Greening Working Group. So we spent that first year and a half doing a lot of educational programming. And now these folks are going to help with the creation of the Greening Southside Master Plan. And this master plan is going to be an all hands approach, essentially in which community members are able to say, we want trees here, we want a bike path here, we want a walking trail here, we want park benches and shelters and whatever. And so it doesn't matter if you are a nonprofit, a civic association, a city, a local government, having this plan in place, knowing that it's been informed by the community will help ensure that we are building healthy, resilient, and sustainable projects that are going to be beneficial for everyone in the long run. And of course, I have to shout out just the number of trees, and I was surprised when I saw this. DPU, Department of Public Utilities, last year through their master planning process, they set out a goal to plant, I think maybe like 20 or 24,000 trees by a certain date, and they surpassed that. And so far everybody in the city of Richmond in the last 5 years, from 2017 to 2022, have planted almost 36,000 trees. Actually, I'm going to say we have planted 36,000 because we haven't even counted the new trees from this winter. That is incredible work. And that only happens, 1, we had the data, 2, we secured the funding, 3, we're working with each other to make all of this happen. And then 4, of course, we are continuing to raise hell in the halls of power to make all of this happen. Next slide. So kind of like what is happening now, what is next? Jeremy, do you want to just give a quick overview of this exercise here?
Sure. In the few minutes we have left. Thank you, Sheri. So we got funding through the National Oceanic Administration's Environmental Literacy Program to develop this highly localized climate resilience kind of deliberation event for public members, residents of the city to get involved in actually in kind of like a simulated participatory budgeting process where we've distilled these 3 main categories of how you can approach climate resilience in a city. This is fully aligned with the Climate Equity Action Plan, RVA Green 2050. In the city of Richmond. And then the community members meet other community members. Next slide, please. Where they basically get to learn about people's direct experience with climate change in the city of Richmond. Next slide, please. Then they actually decide, oh, maybe Miss McQueen would want to do a lot more communication and connecting with residents because of her experience being kind of left out of the political system, whereas Ebony might really want to be a part of doing these plant nature-based solutions, more parks and more green spaces. Next slide, please. Then I'll just say, then they go through the practice of actually saying what they would want at their collaborative table, and we reach a consensus. It's really beautiful. If you want to learn more about that project, just reach out to me, and I'm happy to send you the materials. Back to you, Sheri.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Jeremy. The reason why that's important, go back to that other slide, is because on the left, we still have development that's happening within the city. And so Manchester, one of the areas that's formerly redlined, that's experiencing a lot of extreme heat, they're cutting down mature stands of trees. And so we still have a lot of issues that we need to address, not only within our communities, but also with our local and state leaders as well, because we want to get to a place such as the image on the right, which is Broad Rock Creek Park, which also is a wonderful area that's a green space. It can be used for recreation, but you notice a lot of the ecological benefits and social benefits that that's going to provide. We have to be able to protect those spaces as we're also dealing with a city that is growing and developing and building as well. Next slide. And that, of course, is, we're talking funding and policy here. So it doesn't always sound like the sexiest thing, but it is absolutely necessary. Again, if your locality does not have climate equity action plans, you need to start working towards that. So here in the city of Richmond, we have RVA Green 2050, which has just been amended. And I took this screenshot of this little flyer here. Essentially, there were 50 of us at City Council, again, advocating for clean energy and climate justice solutions that need to be added into the budget. It's one thing to plant and to build community gardens. It's another to make sure that those areas are able to sustain themselves and grow and be healthy for the long term. And then final slide. So we do unfortunately have a tale of two cities, one on the left in which we have a lot of crumbling infrastructure, and then on the right, these beautifully maintained, well-kept spaces. And it shouldn't be that case. It does not matter. It should not matter based on race, income, or geography, or your zip code, I should say, on your life expectancy, your health outcomes, and the quality of life. And so that is what we are working on here in the city of Richmond. Thank you.
And thank you both for that exhilarating presentation. Very inspiring to hear all of the great progress that you've made, so many trees planted, but of course, many more needed, right? And more maintenance needed as well. But just a fantastic starting point for us today. Yeah, it sounds like echoing some folks in the chat, getting the data together, getting your funding together, and raising hell. I mean, it's a perfect combination, and definitely yields progress. And so thank you all for your participation. If you have not done so already, please do rename yourself in the chat to reflect your name, your affiliation, the organization you're affiliated with, and your state. If you could do it in the order of name, state, and affiliation, just so we can all kind of get a quick glance at where everybody is, that'd be great. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Keep the comments coming. We'll be having Q&A after our next panel. So continue to put your thoughts in the chat. And so as we've just heard, we know centering equity in our work is critical to ensuring that everybody benefits from tree canopy enhancements and expansion, especially in the face of pressing threats from climate change. And so in this next session, we're going to take a deep dive into some model efforts happening within the watershed, and we'll break down how it works to actually integrate equity into design, development, and implementation and funding of tree programs. And so we have a few speakers joining us today. Erica Smith Fichman, who is out of Philadelphia, Parks and Recreation. She'll be talking about the community engagement elements of the Philly Tree Plan that was just released. Brenda Richardson out of the Anacostia Parks and Community Collaborative. She'll be talking about some effective community engagement strategies she's employed, talking to and getting residents involved with tree planting and stewardship along the Anacostia River watershed. And Ruby Stemmle from ecoLatinos will be talking about how to align tree care with the priorities of historically underengaged residents. And so we're excited to have these speakers with us. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Erica to kick us off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be included in this group, even though Philadelphia, which is a city and a county, is technically not in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It is just outside the boundary, but I'm very excited that I get to participate in these conversations and in this community. So I am the community forestry manager at Philadelphia Parks and Recreation, which is a city agency. And I don't think any presentation could have teed up my talk better than what we just heard from Jeremy and Sheri. I'm going to be talking about how we use data to determine our community outreach strategy for the Philly Tree Plan, which is our 10-year strategic plan for the equitable growth and care of Philadelphia's urban forest, which was released last month. So we use data to make sure that the folks who can benefit the most from the increased investment that we're advocating for in this plan, those folks are involved in the creation of the plan itself and in implementation of the plan, and that they are guiding the strategies in their communities. So this was an effort that was led by the city and had a massive project team, and I'll go through some of the elements of that in just a sec. Next slide, please. So the Philly Tree Plan, our mission from the beginning was to establish this plan using the guiding values of community engagement, sustainability, and environmental justice. And I'll go through how we did that. Just next slide, please. So just also a little extra information. The plan was guided by the city, but we looked at the entire urban forest. So street trees, yard trees, park trees, alleyway trees, vacant land trees, campus trees, all of the elements of the urban forest, because as we all know, trees don't recognize boundaries, and the urban forest is all of the trees in the city. Next slide, please. And you will not be surprised to know that Philadelphia has a unfairly distributed urban forest, as many large cities do. You can see on this map, the darker green areas represent a larger percentage of tree canopy. You can see some of our large watershed parks that go through the city up in the northeast there, the Pennypack up in the northwest, the Wissahickon. But this map is basically an inverse map of many of the data points that we just heard about. It's an inverse map of heat in the city, public health like asthma rates. It's an inverse map of income and of rates. So the whiter residents live in the higher canopy areas in the city. Next slide, please. And so our goal for this effort is to grow a fair forest and bring the benefits of trees to the communities that need them the most in the ways that support them the best. Next slide. We began by doing a tree canopy assessment. So again, using data to see where are our trees, where have we lost trees, and where are the opportunities to plant them. You can see we have 20% tree canopy across the city. And again, this is a similar map to what you just saw. Next slide. And then we did an analysis of where we've gained and lost trees over the last 10 years. Most of the tree growth was in large trees getting larger. So protecting trees is a huge part of our focus for this. But the tree loss, you can see, is kind of all over the place, and there are many different reasons for it. And we lost 6% of our tree canopy between 2008 and 2018. Can you next slide, please? So from this tree canopy assessment, we knew that preserving existing canopy would be a really big part of it. And we also knew that because we lost a lot of tree canopy in residential areas, that was actually the land use that lost the most. We knew that individual residents, engaging them is going to be a huge part of our plan. Next slide, please. So the first thing we did before we even hired a consultant for the plan was we held a tree summit where we invited 100 people from institutions, but also community leaders to help guide what the actual plan scope of work was going to be, what we wanted them to focus on, how we wanted the RFP itself to even look. And from that, next slide, we hired a consultant team that was a huge team with one prime consultant and then 3 major legs with urban forestry expertise, policy expertise. But then you can see that the engagement was an equally important leg of the process from the beginning when we even hired our consultant team. And it made up the majority of the budget. And anyone who wants to talk about budgets for strategic plans, I can talk to you after this about how expensive it is to do good community engagement. But we all know how important it is. And the fact that we were able to budget for what we needed is a really important stepping stone to doing good public engagement. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we did was to create a community voices steering committee. This was 28 community leaders from across the city who guided creation of the plan itself, including the public engagement aspects of the plan. So they advised and vetted how we were going to get input from the public. And they also vetted and advised us on how we were going to use the data we had to determine where we wanted to focus our outreach. So next slide. You can see some of the data we used to identify the priority areas of the city included income, included health, like asthma, and then heat, of course. And a lot of these maps look the same as Jeremy and Sheri were just saying. And that helped us to determine where we wanted to focus our outreach to make sure that the folks who do not have tree canopy and who will benefit the most from more investment will be the ones who have a voice in creation of the plan itself. And you'll see this map on the right a couple more times. Next slide, please. As we were moving into the public engagement aspects of the plan, we had a few guiding principles that really informed the way we did it. We were not going to shy away from the truth. I think a lot of folks in our field, we sometimes try to emphasize the benefits over the burdens, but we know that trees can create a burden to people. So we wanted to really lead with that sometimes when appropriate. And we wanted to not be, brushing that under the rug as we were going through this process. We used plain language in all of our tools. We wanted to honor the expertise of the folks who are living in these communities, and we wanted to listen without ego. There was a lot of listening that went into the process of this plan. Next slide, please. So other than the Community Voices Steering Committee, we used 6 other tools to engage folks. Now, this was the spring of 2021. We launched the planning process in March of 2020, so it was great timing, as you might imagine. We had to pivot immediately from in-person community outreach to figuring out how to do this virtually. So I'm going to go through the three tools that are in bold in more detail, but we also had stakeholder workshops where we had 7 2-hour workshops with folks with specific expertise, either city infrastructure, environmental education, etc. We did a virtual open house of presentations that people could read about the history of the urban forest and what the plan was going to do. And then we had a photo challenge on Instagram that was fun in a different way of getting people involved. But I'm going to go through these other 3 in more depth. Next slide, please. So we had a city. So we did a community meeting tour. That's what we called it. And we used the priority areas to guide where we were going to meet folks. These were meetings that were already happening. So civic association meetings, business association meetings that we got on the agenda for. We had a 5-slide deck presentation that we gave, and then the rest of it was listening and transcribing notes. And then all of that data was transcribed into the feedback that we used to inform the plan. We went to 32 community meetings and spoke to 850 people in those priority areas for the most part. Next slide, please. We created a 6-week paid program of neighborhood ambassadors. There were 22 people. Again, they were clustered in those priority areas, 5 neighborhoods specifically. And we had cohorts of about 2 to 4 people in each of the priority neighborhoods who participated in this. It was 6 weeks. There was a little bit of getting people up to speed on urban forestry to give them context, but for the most part, these folks were ambassadors from their neighborhood to the plan. It was not urban forestry ambassadors going out and talking to neighbors about trees. It was coming to us and talking to us about how they and their neighbors interact with trees and what trees mean to them, what kind of challenges they encounter, et cetera. So we did visual storytelling workshops. We did workshops on peer interviews, and they conducted hundreds of hours of peer interviews that they handed over to us that, again, got transcribed. They received a stipend for the 6 weeks, and they were just a really crucial voice in creation of this plan. Next slide, please. I just kind of went over this. And we did neighborhood walking workshops where they could point out specific things in their neighborhood as well. And so these are the folks here. These are most of the folks who participated in our neighborhood ambassador program. And we chose these folks because they were not existing community leaders in urban forestry. We did not want people who were already part of the choir, so to speak. We wanted people who had an interest and who were not already pegged as community leaders, because we know, those of us who do this work know that those people are already way overburdened. They're like the chair of this and this and this. So we wanted people who were not already the chair of everything. So we could get their perspective in a much more raw and unfiltered way. Next slide, please. These are just pictures of, these are 2 examples from either end of the spectrum from the visual storytelling that we did with them, noting the way that people are utilizing the tree canopy in their neighborhoods and some of the burdens they encounter. You can see this tree that's been pruned away from the wires and is clearly not a good ambassador for trees in this community. So we wanted to see the good and the bad. Next slide, please. And then this is a final celebration we had with our ambassadors. Next slide. We also did a citywide survey. So again, this was using plain language to ask people about their experiences with trees. And the way that we promoted this was by trying to be very clear that this was not just, hey, do you love trees? Tell us why you love trees. All of our, we had all of our branding for this said, do you love trees or do you hate trees? Tell us about it. I'll show you a sign in just a couple slides. Actually, next slide, please. So again, we did plain language questions for this. We had lots of different distribution networks. So that included advocacy groups, pedestrian advocacy groups, tenants' rights groups, immigrant support organizations. And we have an amazing network of urban forestry community leaders, and we of course distributed it that way. But we, again, wanted to make sure that we weren't only hearing from the choir. One thing that we're really proud of is that the average time it took people to fill out this survey was 20 minutes. And that is because we had a lot of open-ended questions and people told us stories. They wrote poetry. They told us a lot of things about their experience with trees through this survey. Next slide, please. And midway through the survey process, we evaluated where we were receiving our responses from. And unfortunately, it was more folks responding from the higher tree canopy areas, the richer, whiter areas. And so we raised a little bit of extra money and we put out 150 yard signs in parks in those higher priority areas. We made 3,000 phone calls. We actually provided stipends to people who did those phone calls and went through the survey over the phone with people. We put out text messages in those neighborhoods, and then we did door hangers as well. And here you can see the messaging there about love trees or hate trees. We want to hear from you. And that really helped us to get to a better place in terms of the proportion of people answering from priority areas. Next slide. And you can see we had at least 60% of our responses, of which we received over 7,000 survey responses. And that was in 8 different languages we translated it into, and we received responses in all of those languages. 60% of them came from the high and medium priority zip codes. So we were really proud of that. And then some other stats, the 22 ambassadors, they conducted 62 peer interviews amongst them, and then the almost 850 residents from those priority areas as well. So this is a little summary of the way that we reached out to communities, specifically those priority areas. Next slide, please. And I don't think I have too much more time. So I do have a slide. Can you go 2 more slides? All of the key takeaways and the goals and things you can actually read. This is the one. You can actually read in the plan, and I have the link, and I'll put the link in the chat as well. But I wanted to show that in the plan itself, we have, oh, I have 5 minutes left. Great. Never mind. Go back, please. Okay, there we go. So, key takeaways from our outreach. We learned something that we didn't really expect to learn, which was that the residents of Philadelphia recognize that trees have value. There really aren't any tree haters. There are people who love trees and can afford to have them on their property or around their property, and then there are people who understand the value of trees but don't feel confident that they can afford to have them near their property because they're not seeing trees being taken care of. It's not that they don't understand the value of trees, it's that cost, that ROI is not working in their favor, right? The return on investment for them could mean a much more catastrophic problems if something did happen, and they don't have the confidence that something won't happen. So we also learned that, we can see that there's disparity in tree canopy across the city if we look at maps, but people feel it on the ground and it feels personal. They understand that it's because of a lot of the historic reasons. I didn't even mention redlining, but the redlining map is, of course, an inverse map to the tree canopy map as well in Philadelphia. We learned that trees are a burden to homeowners, and that sometimes that includes surprise costs. So again, that goes into people's calculations of ROI when they are deciding whether to accept a tree from even a free tree program, right? And we got a lot more information about what those burdens are. We did also learn that people, even if they value trees, they don't always know how to get one. We learned that maintenance is really crucial trust building with communities, and we cannot plant more trees in some communities without proving that we will take care of the ones that we already have. And then in general, the thing that strategic plans are supposed to do, increase the clarity and consistency and coordination and collaboration, all these C's, of how the city works together, works with nonprofits and stakeholders, and works with the public. So from this, next slide, we created 8 goals that really inform the Philly Tree Plan itself to protect the existing future forests and future forests. As you can see, that was something we knew from the beginning. Obviously, we want to grow the forest, but we want to grow it in an equitable way across the city. We want to invest in people, and that is not just in planting a tree and having that impact their property value, but developing programs where people can be paid to plant and care for trees in their own neighborhoods. Improving the ladder from workforce development programs, which we have amazing ones here in Philadelphia with PowerCore PHL, the ladder from those programs to full-time jobs and careers in urban forestry. We wanted to reduce the burden of trees on residents. You know what, this is actually an older slide. We actually changed restore to something else. These are slightly different. We wanted to improve communication between residents and the city. We want to make sure people can advocate for themselves. And we want to celebrate the ways that people are already interacting with trees. So we're looking at reducing the burdens, but also emphasizing the ways that people culturally, spiritually, emotionally interact with trees. Next slide, please. And the priority neighborhoods didn't go away. They show up in the plan itself in implementation. We have 7 of them, and we have an entire section where we outline what the goals are in each neighborhood for planting and funding to properly invest in these neighborhoods and increase the tree canopy. We have goals about how to coordinate between the city and nonprofits in these neighborhoods, guiding principles for how to collaboratively do community engagement and work with communities to get trees planted. Because we know where trees are, we know where the opportunities are to plant trees, but the social desirability of where trees should go, that takes time, that takes organizing, that takes staff. And so that's a really big part of the plan itself. So my last slide is the contact slide. It has my email, the link for where you can find the Philly tree plan and read in much more depth. There's an executive summary, so you don't have to worry too much. It's 128 pages, so no pressure. But I'm really grateful to be here and happy to answer questions after the panel is over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. Wow. So much work went into that plan. Congratulations on getting through it.
Thank you.
Fundraising successfully for it and for moving through it. Yeah, planning is a beast. So great to hear about all of the creative mechanisms for engagement of residents in the planning process. And of course, plans are one step, but then engagement actually has to happen with the actual stewardship work on the back end. And that's what we'll get into in our next couple of presentations here. So we'll turn it over to Brenda Richardson, who has a lot of experience doing this kind of hands-on engagement with residents and encouraging them to get involved in local tree stewardship in the Anacostia watershed. Brenda?
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to the Chesapeake Bay for allowing me to be a part of this presentation. And I'm honored to be on this panel with these other 2 wonderful panelists. I just wanted to start out by sharing a story. When we look at being rooted in equity and ensuring tree canopy benefits for all, we have to be very, very mindful of where the people are that we're serving. And when I look at this picture that I have before you, this is my dream for all urban disfavored communities to be lying in a forest that belongs to them as well. So I always keep this picture around to remind me that all things are possible. And as I sit and be a part of this conversation, I'm even more confident that it's going to happen. I live in a community, I live in Ward 8, which is on the other side of the river. And we've got all types of health disparities, all kinds of social challenges, educational challenges, and lots of environmental justice issues. But the greatest issue that we face is fear. We are overwhelmed and exhausted by fear. So people are like, well, why are Black folks afraid of trees? Well, in our community, I can't speak for all Black folks in disinvested urban communities, but I can talk about mine. Trees symbolize somebody hiding behind a tree and hurting you. Trees symbolize gentrification, and also trees symbolize, especially when they're bushes, that the drug dealers can hide their weapons and their drugs either behind the trees or in the bushes. And then also, you guys, the pandemic had a devastating effect on all of us, but more so on those of us who live in dispirited communities. So imagine we're already exposed to health disparities. We're listening to gunshots every day. We're trying to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. And then the pandemic happens. So that just compounded our collective trauma that we are exposed to on a daily basis. So what did that do? It created a sedentary lifestyle for us. So as a result of that, we came up with some pretty interesting ways to look at tree canopy and how to connect community. So, and I also want to share, you guys, we're looking at violence as it relates to trees and nature and our environment. We've got a high incidence of gun violence here in the District of Columbia. And one of my colleagues and I, she's a professor in Mississippi, are writing a paper on nature-based trauma-informed programming in parks. Because we strongly believe that trees are a reflection of our communities. So if you look at the tree loss, trees are speaking to us, you guys. If you're looking at tree loss in my neighborhood, there is loss in our neighborhood. We are mourning, we are grieving the loss of our loved ones, and the trees are a reflection of that. I don't know if you've ever seen that correlation, but it exists here. So as a result of that, we're looking at adverse childhood experiences, and we're comparing it to adverse community environments. And so we're looking at that, and we look at this whole scenario with gun violence, not only its impact on folks, but how it impacts our neighborhoods. So fear. We've got this beautiful park, Oxen Run Park in Ward 8. It's the largest park in the city's inventory. These stunningly beautiful, majestic trees. But guess what? I wouldn't take a walk in that park by myself, because there's this fear when you're by yourself. There's this fear that you can be harmed. So we're always mindful of our public safety. So I was also asked to, so just be mindful as I go on to, because those are the challenges, and I'm going to share the good things. So just be mindful, we're exhausted, we're suffering from collective trauma. Oh, and by the way, they've added race fatigue on top of everything else that we have to deal with. We're fatigued from dealing with racial issues as well that are imposed on us. And we're just struggling to live a good life from day to day. So I think that when we look at opportunities, I think there's something, and you dig deeper, I think we should be investing in nature-based, trauma-informed programming in our parks. I say that because Melanie Chokas Bradley has taken me forest bathing on several occasions, and we don't realize that forest bathing reduces stress and anxiety. It lifts our moods, it improves our sleep, and it sparks our creativity. So if we have an opportunity to get our children, to get our returning citizens, to get our moms who are on TANF out of the house and into the park, where their spirits could be lifted and their mindsets could be elevated, I strongly, strongly believe that we would be in a better place. We did these equity tours with the mayor's racial equity officer. We took her on a tour of our parks, and it was fascinating. Some parks were in better shape than others, but what was that rooted in? Racial equity. It was rooted in race. So we're very, very grateful to have her, because there are maintenance issues that are centered around our trees and our parks. And I also wanted to share how grateful I am for Earl over at the district's urban forestry administration, because he gets it. He understands that the heat island effect is impacting those of us east of the river more than it is those that are on the other side of the river. And we had to, people don't want to talk about trees because it's like, I'm trying to dodge bullets and you want me to sit down and have a conversation about trees? I don't think so. So what we did, and it all happened by happenstance. A mom had lost a loved one who had succumbed to gun violence. She asked us if she could plant a tree in Oxen Run Park. And I will forever be indebted to Earl and Duff and his amazing staff because they said yes. And as a result of that, some other moms found out about the trees being planted because there are lots of people who's lost their loved ones to gun violence. And as a result of us planting those 8 trees in the Mother's Peace Garden in Oxen Run Park, we came up with this notion of a memory forest of trees that celebrated the life of those loved ones who were lost to gun violence. And you guys, it's amazing because they come back every year around their birthdays and you see little balloons and stuffed animals around the trees. So this was a creative way to get folks to invest in trees in a way that related to where they were and what they understood. And we're very, very grateful for that opportunity. We also do lots of outdoor learning in the park that's centered around trees. And again, thanks to the folks at Urban Forestry, our kids are now well versed on tree identification. And had it not been for them, this would not have happened. And it also created opportunities for our kids, career opportunities that they would have never otherwise expected. So Crystal, I want to show my slides now because I want to show you what it looks like. So we have music in the park. And this young lady comes to, this is the Mother's Peace Garden. And she comes there to find peace for her soul while she plays her drum. And see how lush and beautiful our park is? I love this park. Next slide. This is a slide of all my babies. My babies come to the park during the summer, and sometimes it's really hot, and this all happened during the pandemic. But what we've learned to do is to be mindful that these babies are hot, but they want their spirits to be calmed. So what we did was, now when we have events, we always have a cool snack for them and not just water. We're mindful that some of these children may not have eaten that morning. So we want to make sure that not only are their minds nourished, but their little stomachs are nourished as well. Next slide. This is one of my favorite events in the park. It's story time with MPD, our Metropolitan Police Department. That young woman in the white shirt holding the book was one of our assistant chiefs in the police department, and she came out to the park with some cadets and they read to the kids. And the beauty of this is you see the shade, they're cool, they're attentive. And we have this partnership with the DC Public Library. Every child got a book. Every book that was read, the child got a book and they were able to take it home and start their own library. So we felt really, really good about that. And the other thing this did, you guys, it introduced them to feeling comfortable being in the park in a different way. And it also helped them to establish a different relationship with our police department so they didn't see them as the bad guys. Next slide, please. This is also another photo of another session. This was another police officer that read to the kids. But what we also did, and you guys can do this too if you want, if you have we have US Park Police, and they came over and brought their horses, the park police horses. That's why the kids are standing in this circle. Many of our children have never seen a real horse up close and personal, and it was a really wonderful experience for them. Next slide. So this is our Moms Demand Action Stop the Gun Violence event. And you know what this shows is that racial equity can work. Here's this man who was volunteering. This little kid was having a hard time trying to get these weeds out of this planter, and he came over to help this kid, and it was just a beautiful experience to watch. Next slide. And this was another story time at the Ark. They have this beautiful oasis in the park, and this was a totally different group of community. But look at how starry-eyed that little baby is. And what's in the middle of both of them emitting energy and calming their spirits is that beautiful tree that's right there in the middle. Is that my last slide? I forgot. Is that the last one? Oh, and this, you guys, we had the wonderful opportunity. That's Tommy Wells, who was the director of the Department of Energy and the Environment. A church allowed us to plant a memory forest in their lot. They had a vacant lot, didn't know what to do with it. A lot of young people, young men in particular, had succumbed to gun violence, and they allowed us to plant these trees and create a memory forest. And Tommy said something really, really poignant. He said, with every new tree, a new life is restored. So we are really, really strong advocates of trees. Next slide. So this is the final slide. My babies have so much fun in the park, and it just brings me such joy to see them be kids, not to be afraid, not to be hungry, not to be angry, but to be kids who are happy and having fun. And if you notice, there are all these beautiful trees around them, and they're standing in the shade. So thank you guys so much for this wonderful opportunity to share our challenges in disfavored communities and the opportunities that we bring to our community that showers us with favor so that we won't be in disfavor forever. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you for the work that you've done to repair and restore folks' relationships with the land that is theirs, right? This is public land. This is land that folks should feel at home in, and it's so important to be able to heal and use nature, use tree planting stewardship, use community building opportunities to be able to do what you've done, which is repair a lot of trust in institutions and repair our perception of our own safety in our community. So thank you so much for your work. Continue to keep questions, comments coming, everybody, in the chat, and we'll round out this panel with Ruby Stemmle of ecoLatinos, who will talk a little bit more about how she's done similar engagement in communities across the watershed as well. Ruby?
Yes. Hi, Sarah. It's been years.
Too long.
It's incredible. Sarah was one of the first partners that we worked with when we started ecoLatinos, and it's wonderful to see you again. So I'm going to do a little bit of my conversation is going to be a little bit about specific work that we do with the Latino communities in the region. Next slide. So ecoLatinos mission is to empower Latino communities for social and environmental justice, working collaborative with community members and partners to engage, educate, and advocate for Latino environmental priorities. we focus our work mostly on Spanish-speaking underserved communities. Next, a little bit about me. I'm Ruby Stemmle. I was born Ruby Rosso in Bogota, Colombia. I've been in the area since 1999. I have a lot of experience working with engagement of Latino communities with through my jobs with government, you know, over 15 years working with government. My last job with Governor O'Malley as the director of the Governor's Commission on Hispanic Affairs, where I learned a lot about working with underserved communities, but have the experience to do it basically only from the government perspective. I have a passion for conservation, and started ecoLatinos in 2016 after, you know, at a point in my life where I needed to decide, do I move to the next job or do I follow my dream and start something that I am passionate about and give me an opportunity to leave a legacy for being on this planet. So I love hiking. I started schooling recently and recently. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to be on the river, on the Anacostia River. I love historical tourism. I'm a 6 of 12 siblings, and the little one there is Luna, my little friend and companion. Next slide. My purpose today is threefold. First, we're gonna go over some data about minorities and the environment. Then we're gonna talk about the tree culture in Latino communities, and finally touch on principles of engagement that we apply to do our work. Next slide. So bear with me. Some people that have seen my presentations are familiar with this information, but maybe of you may not. So first, I like to establish that looking at this from the environmental perspective, evidence show that that climate change and the environment are of greater concern to minorities than to non-minorities. I don't know if you knew that. Ethnic minorities have greater concern for the for the environment. So inclusion effectively could be a great asset to the environmental cause. Latinos are more concerned with global warming than non-Latinos. Did you imagine that before? And Spanish language Latinos are even more concerned, and that is according to the Climate Change in the Latino Mind by the Yale program on climate change communication. Environmental issues are as important as passage of comprehensive immigration reform, which is pretty important when you look at how immigration is one of the priorities for many in the Latino community. But again, we are focusing, and ecoLatinos were focused on that first generation Latino, mostly the underserved Spanish-speaking Latino. Next slide. We all know that that minorities are more exposed to air pollution and hazardous land uses. There is less tree canopy in lower income neighborhoods, that there is greater vulnerability to health impacts from climate change. And we need to also understand and remember why Latino communities are growing so much among other people from other parts of the world, because globally climate change is driving human migration and displacement. And okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So another reason it is important to work with, to do our work, for us to do our work, is because there is a connection between the environment and the community's spiritual values. For many in our communities, taking action is a spiritual obligation. Their spiritual values drive their dedication to protecting the creation. An example of that is the Pope's encyclica Laudato Si on the care for our common home, which is a call to action from the Pope on environmental action. Next slide. So recent research has found that 7 in 10 Latinos have never been contacted by an organization working to reduce global warming. Isn't that amazing? There is a disconnect between the high level of impact, concern, beliefs that minorities have toward the environment and the fact that they are not being engaged. And environmental organizations continue to struggle to overcome barriers involving and engaging all the members of the community, or either not engage them effectively. To bridge this gap, it's important to be aware of the key barriers of engagement and principles for effective engagement that we see at the very end, at least from our own perspective and our own experience. Next slide. The recent studies in the Chesapeake Bay that the Chesapeake Bay Trust and the Founders Network and Choose Clean Water Coalition found also that 83% of environmental organizations hold DEI or DEIJ today or as a core value, yet only 9% consider the DEIJ process effective. So we need to bridge this gap, and we need to understand, we need to really have a clear idea of what are those barriers of engagement, and we need to, take action or find solutions. And by the way, I really appreciated Erika's presentation because it's an amazing program, and if I could, I would adopt exactly the same program because the processes that they have followed to do that program are exactly what we have learned that would work, only we would adapt it to our own community. So then let's talk about the tree culture in the Latino communities. Next slide, please. When we started, a lot of our focus, work focused on connecting environmental organizations, traditional environmental stakeholders in the Chesapeake Bay with the Latino communities. We implemented the existing programs and sort of tried to bring them as the way they were designed into the local Latino communities. However, we found that trying to engage Latinos that in ways that were not consistent with their culture, traditions, socioeconomic conditions, not just language, that these programs were not being as effective. We weren't being as successful at getting the engagement that we were seeking. Next slide. So we do community-based environmentalism. We're not tree experts. We have wide experience in effective outreach and engagement of Latino communities, as I shared from where actually I come from. But starting ecoLatinos, I had the opportunity to come down from the privilege of being in a government job, representing a government, official, to come to the community, meet the community, and, get the shovel in my hand and dig the hole and plant the tree. And that has been a beautiful experience. We established that Latinos are invested in the environmental, crisis and environmental priorities, but they are not necessarily engaged in programs. We need to decide programs, take them down from the traditional ways of doing our work. Programs that have often come from privileged communities that have not changed. And those programs may not be very welcome or may not have the impact that we seek, because for example, a large proportion of Latinos live in apartment complexes. And so they don't even have the ability to decide whether or not to plant a tree in the neighborhood. So programs really, when it comes to the Latino community and many other minorities, they don't prioritize the community or the priorities of the community. Next slide. So the way we do it is meeting people where they are. I am seeing a little inconsistent between your slide and mine because the titles are not showing for some reason. Meet people where they are. So we go to church, we go to the community where the community is. We meet our communities at churches, at schools, at community centers. We go to their already captive audiences. We tailor our programs to the communities we serve. It is almost a one-on-one work. When we work in partnerships today, instead of trying to bring the program the way it was originally or designed and traditionally implemented, we tailor the program, we adapt it to the community priorities, to the community needs, to the economic background. We have tree programs. We have planted trees in Prince George's County at St. Mary's Church, for example. Got a youth group and at the church and planted 52 trees in partnership for the Alliance with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. We also have a program to implement like what is called in Prince George's County rate check rebate program. We're bringing this program and getting the communities the opportunity to get rebates and to get the financial comfort of like having a rebate for their investment in the tree or the base management practice. And we are, implementing those programs, but we're bringing it our own way, not the way it was originally designed, but our own, the way that we know the community is going to receive it and it's going to be more effective. Next slide. So basically, as I said earlier, Latinos live many times in apartment complexes, and but a few live in they are homeowners. Going to these communities to plant trees is a cultural experience. Is a celebration. We don't just go and plant a tree and leave just plant a tree and leave and have no community engagement. They often we come to a house to bring a tree, and there is a tent in the backyard where empanadas and horchata, and they are expecting us with a celebration, and the entire family is part of the experience. So it is a beautiful thing to work. It's very inspiring because it's so personal and it's so intimate that it really is a practice that I encourage you to apply and experience. Next slide.
Ruby, you've got about a minute left.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay. So how do I do that? Okay, so thank you, Sarah. So tree diversity. Keeping one of the things that Latinos have their own preference for having their own preference of how they practice environmentalism. As I say, there is a strong family and community component, but Latinos are more inclined to select, for example, trees that are ornamental or that are edible. Maybe because of where people come from the tropics, where there is a lot of flower and and biodiversity, and so it's a thing to consider. I think this is an opportunity for a case study on how or what trees are the ones that the community prefer, and I'm sure there are plenty of trees that are local, that are native, that can feel that need or that expectation. Next slide. So there is a perception there is a lack of engagement in our communities. Engagement underserved and isolated communities require practice and cultural competence, being sensitive to the needs and priorities of each community. More tree canopy, as Brenda was saying, increases perceived safety and can result in crime reduction. There is a lack of areas where the community can gather in a recreational form. Our kids and teens need spaces to recreate, and tree canopy attracts recreational needs. They not just have an environmental, but a social impact and a mental health impact. So tree canopy is a privilege of more affluent neighborhoods, and we need to change that. If we do an assessment of the trees that they have and the condition of the trees, adding the tree canopy density reduces energy consumption, runoff, benefits social aspects. All these things need to be taught or shared with the community. Bring restoration to these communities will bring unity with positive social impact and elevation of the community. And I don't know if I have time to go quickly through this slide, because these are the principles of engagement, but we can share it, I guess, with everybody where.
Yeah, well, why don't we share it out? Because we do need to wrap it, but we'll have time for questions because folks have been asking questions too in the chat for you and the rest of the panelists.
Okay, well, sounds great. Thank you so much. Sorry for extending.
That's okay. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you, Erica, Brenda, Ruby, for your work. And yeah, we had some questions come through about outreach, about engagement. If you all have additional questions for our panel of experts here, please do throw them in the chat. A question for all of your community partners. I'll throw it to you first, Erica. Folks are curious about how you actually did the recruiting of the neighborhood ambassadors for the planning process.
Yeah, so we had the Community Voices Steering Committee, which was made up of community leaders that are already involved in urban forestry. And so we leaned on them in some cases to identify members of their communities who were not, again, like the president of the civic or, those things, because those folks were part of the Community Voices Steering Committee. We wanted the folks who were interested or even not interested, actually, but were, the more unofficial connected folks who didn't have formal leadership roles, but would be interested in something like this. And so we kind of did the snowballing, right, where we asked our existing contacts for more contacts and those contacts for more contacts. And that is how we got some of those folks. And even, some of those folks have become more involved in urban forestry since that experience. In fact, one of them is now the executive director of a small tree planting and advocacy group in West Philadelphia, which is really cool because, she did not have that experience before, but her experience in community organizing and, environmental justice kind of led her to that. So that's just a side note. But yeah, I think those, a lot of the people that we tag for these experiences are already overburdened with their community work. And so we were looking for folks who are not, we're kind of like those unofficial folks. Yeah.
Great. And speaking of engagement, or having some requests for Ruby to go through that slide, I wonder if Ruby, if you and also Brenda can speak to, while we maybe can tee up the slide, if you can speak to engaging renters, right? Because there's a high proportion of renters in both the communities that you engage, primarily. So Brenda, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, and then we can round it out with Ruby and her slide too.
So renters are tough because of what Erica just shared. But I find that if you are patient and are willing to start with one person and take the time to build it up, that you can draw people in. The other thing that I find is that incentives are really, really helpful to engage folks when they have a lot on their plate. One of the things that we've started doing is using $30 Safeway gift cards. You'd be surprised at how many people still do not have access to food. It's frightening. So we've learned through our experience that we can get 25 people quite easily in a building where they're renters. It's much easier to get them engaged that way. But then the issue becomes, do you always have money as a nonprofit to secure $30 Safeway gift cards to make that happen? The other thing that I will share is that it's also wonderful to have great partners. And I'm not talking about just renters here, I'm talking across the board, because I am not an expert on trees, but very, very grateful for our collaborations with groups like KC Trees, because they're the experts, they know our community, they come out, and they have a lot of patience. And when you're in this work, you guys, you have to have patience, because things are not going to work for you the first time you come out. You have to be willing to make a big commitment to stick it out until the end. Thanks, Sarah.
Excellent. And I'll hand it over to Ruby as well to talk engagement, potentially engagement with renters, and some of these principles of engagement that folks are really eager to hear.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, and so briefly, so the way we follow, the process is that there are plenty of resources to identify communities you want to work with, like the census that are like Erica showed. You guys had the equity maps and identify, the specific communities that were lacking and where the need was. Again, as I mentioned earlier, meeting people where they are, build the relationships with the community. I mean, there is, just establish this connection, this relationship, this cultural, exchange is very important. Develop cultural competence. When it comes to cultural competence, be aware of your own beliefs and your worldview, and you have to also adapt your attitude toward cultural differences. Don't be afraid. The community is there, happy and eager to receive everybody who wants to come with a tree, or to work together to increase the quality of life. Respect the community calendar. It is important, and that's very important, because that's a big challenge. The community, our communities work 2 jobs. It's almost impossible to get their attention. So you have to adapt the program to those times. You have to work maybe on the Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon. Recognize the varieties of communication needs. Don't rely on translation. Don't rely on putting a flyer and send it via social media or on the website, because you're not going to get it back to meeting people where they are. Go to captive audiences, churches, schools, community centers, libraries. Align programs to the community priorities, as I said earlier. Programs that traditionally work for the general community may not work for the minority or the underserved communities, or the Latino communities even less. As I said earlier, you need to adapt your program so they sort of match the priority expectations and the priority and the needs of the community. Empower community decision making. Don't limit yourself just to put information and leave there. It takes a process where you have to go from informing, consulting, involving, collaborating, and and at the end letting the community take ownership. Again, I am so impressed with Sarah's program. I really love it. I would recommend people to follow that template. Employ community friendly networks. Again, website or prior distribution alone, if they are not written in a way that are easily understandable, short in words and large in pictures. A way that in Hispanic community is effective is using WhatsApp. As one of the ways is you're more easily communicating with them in WhatsApp than any other way. And then remember the why. And that is when I get a little bit, romantical, philosophical. We are all human beings. We breathe the same air. We all want to get the best of for our children. And we need to work together to make those things happen. So yeah, basically those are the keys that I applied to the community, for the community engagement. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Ruby, for that insight. Really, really helpful. We had another, it's interesting, we had a question, I think probably a lot of folks have this question, which is, what's the best way to engage community members? And so before I tee it off to each of you for responses on that, I just want to challenge everybody on the line to think of this kind of work as you would think of stewarding a tree, right? Somebody was going to sell you an injection to say, this is the best growth serum for a tree. Would you just inject the tree and then leave it alone and be like, I did it. See, I did the thing. Would you expect that tree to thrive if you didn't water it, if you didn't check on it, if you didn't evaluate its conditions at first and kind of work from there, if you didn't, prune it and all of the things, right, that we know are important for tree health, right? So I just want to challenge everybody on the line to not see community engagement as a checked box of a thing to do, or like to take the best of whatever you're hearing today and just say, we're just going to do this one thing, and then expect to have wildly, dramatically different results. So with that said, to give folks at least maybe a place to start, curious from the panel, your thoughts on top effective community engagement strategies you've seen. I'll go ahead and start with Brenda this time, and we can go back around to Erica and Ruby.
Thanks, Sarah. I think, I'm mindful of all these books. Scott Kratz gives me all these books on trees, and it talks about how trees have lifelines to each other. And I think that we have to do the same. We have to create a continuum of care that creates a lifeline from the trees to the people that we are serving. And I think that, there's danger in some of our communities when you're attempting to do that, but that's why we have police officers. So I'm so glad you asked that question, because sometimes the connection is lost when people will come plant a tree and then they're gone. So what are we supposed to do now? When we're mindful that we're still very angry, we're still very afraid, who's going to be that guiding light that helps us to protect, preserve, and conserve our environment with trees and the very environment that we happen to live in. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Brenda. Go ahead, Erica.
This is a very, very hard question to answer because I think what people want to hear is, oh, you got to do a survey or you got to do the neighborhood ambassador program or whatever. But like to your point and to Brenda's point, the success of our program was built in the 10 years of community building we did before we did the plan. The understanding that we were going to be asking a lot of our partners, and we were going to be building new partners and like recruiting more people into the fold, and we needed to steward those relationships so that it wasn't a box that we checked and people didn't feel like they were taken advantage of or used for their input and then discarded. So before we did the plan, we hired a community organizer, and she held all of the relationships with the Community Voices Committee, she did all of those community meetings, the 32 community meetings. She had the relationships with the ambassadors and now is continuing those relationships. And I think that was one of the most impactful things, because to Ruby's point, you've got a lot of community members who communicate in different ways. Some of your most informally powerful folks, you got to call them on the phone. And then that's a 25-minute conversation or 45, depending on who you are. And that takes a lot of time, and you have to have someone who has that time to do it. And so we hired a community organizer that supported the public engagement aspects because we knew that we needed that person to hold the relationships throughout. And there's really no magic bullet. I mean, that's a bad analogy. Sorry, folks. There's no magic answer to this.
Thanks, Erica, for that. Ruby?
I think everything has been said. I agree with everything that has been said. I definitely, think that meeting people where they are. I mean, get out of your comfort zone and go to the community where the community is. Build the partnerships, not just the partnerships with other stakeholders that can, cover other different areas of your program, but build partnerships with community organized community groups that you probably will already find there. Try to identify captive audiences. That is a good start, because if you many times you can call to a meeting, send flyers, put it on the website, put it on social media, and nobody shows up. So again, go to the community where the community is, partner, and just you have to have it in your heart to do this. Do it with love, and it will work.
Sarah, may I share one more thing?
Sure.
I forgot to mention that we're also looking at dignity communication. And you can't, so it's not just about us, as Ruby and Erica said, and meeting us where we are, but are you meeting yourself where you are? The outsider that's coming into the community and having the wherewithal to understand, well, why would anybody live here with all this poverty and gun violence? Well, you've got to check yourself too. So as a result of that, we're starting to look at dignity communication so that when folks from outside of our community come inside of our community, they treat us with dignity, because we can't leave where we are. And the circumstances are exactly what they are, because this is not necessarily where folks choose to live. It's where people have to live.
Fantastic point. And a really good point. And then there were like a bunch more questions. please keep the questions. We have them jotted down. And so hopefully you'll be able to keep them for fodder in the next session, which is our discussion breakouts. So I want to thank our three amazing panelists for their hard work and their dedication to doing tree canopy stewardship in an equitable and inclusive way. So thank you all for your commentary, for your wisdom, and for your example. We're excited to continue the conversation in our breakout rooms. And just as a reminder to everybody, right, just like Brenda was just saying, environmental justice, it's actually about rectifying systems, processes, and outcomes that facilitate inequitable distribution, inequitable access, and undue burden of environmental resources and harms, right? So it's about correcting all of that, right? And so, now more than ever, historical federal and state investments are available to actually help us do that work. They're going to require that we have a keen eye on like the work that's been done in the past, and figuring out a way to evolve the work that we're all doing together to be able to move forward. So thinking about Brenda's last comment and a lot of the feedback from Ruby and Erica as well, it's important that we don't just channel resources to folks who already have them, right? It's important to do the extra work of hiring a community organizer, meeting people on the Sunday afternoon, if that's the time that they're available, going to them and facilitating, additional incentives around gift cards and, having meals available to meet people, where they are, so that folks from historically marginalized communities can feel seen as whole people and seen as, the in their existing state, and have that be respected before we kind of barge in to try and do something different, right? And so we want your ideas about how to improve funding and policy outcomes, but think about that in the back of your mind, knowing that the systems we have going on, they're not perfect, right? That's why we're trying to work to change them. And we have a huge wind at our backs now to do so. So let's not do business as usual. Let's challenge ourselves to do it better. So you'll see some prompts in every room that can help you think through some of these solutions. And please have a great time in your equity discussions. You'll be assigned to your rooms at random, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if I need to turn it over to Brenda or Crystal, but I think you'll be able to be separated into your breakout rooms here shortly. And so welcome all back. Welcome back. Welcome back. We are just about to dismiss for lunch, but before we do that, check out the tree equity score, you guys. You see it on the screen. If you have not checked it out before, definitely do so. I was really excited and proud of this tool creation, participating in this tool creation during my time at American Forest some years ago. And so please do check it out. It's very helpful. Crystal's graciously thrown the link in the chat for us so we can explore that during our lunchtime. And we will actually reconvene, and we'll give an extra 5 minutes and we'll all come back at 12:30. Okay, so we'll be back at 12:30. Enjoy your lunch, enjoy the tree equity score. If you want to network with some folks, you can hang on the line and talk to folks in some, I think there's some networking rooms that will be open. So we will see you all at 12:30 after you've gotten some nourishment. All check out the tree. Hope you were all able to check out the tree equity score tool. And hopefully that will be a helpful tool as you continue forward making your policy and funding program and programmatic improvements and enhancements in order to expand healthy tree canopy across the watershed. So I can't believe like we're already out of the last big segment, the big chunk of our workshop here. So we have come to the point of time to talk action. We've talked a lot about ideas. We've brainstormed, and folks have shared some of the things that have worked in their respective jurisdictions. And now we're going to be hearing about taking action. And so I'm really excited to have our panelists join us to talk more about that. But before we get into their panel, we do want to take a very brief poll to kind of get everybody back in the swing of things. And it's a little bit of a pop quiz. So what are the 3 themes of this event? So you have some options to choose from: tree loss, planting, partnerships, equity, co-benefits of trees, or climate resilience. And so you can select all of the themes that you think we've been hammering home over the past day and a half. Curious to see what folks' responses are. Looking forward to getting into it, but who's remembering? We've mentioned them. I think they've helped us organize and coalesce around this great event. Curious about if you all remember what our 3 themes are. All right, we'll just give it just a moment for folks who are coming back to join us to go ahead and take that poll. All right. And look at us, we've got 100% right for everybody who said that equity was one of the themes. So great job. And we are on the equity day. So we just had that session. So glad that everybody chose that. Yes. The next highest one was climate resilience, which was also correct. That was also one of our 3 themes. That was the theme that we took on yesterday morning. And then the last theme was actually the next highest. So most folks got it right, tree loss. We're trying to look at solutions to kind of the epidemic of tree loss that's been happening across the watershed and honestly nationwide, where folks' best efforts are not being outpaced by loss. So best planting and maintenance and stewardship preservation efforts. We're needing to reimagine them now so that we can prevent tree loss. So great job on the poll. And with that, we're going to transition into our final presentation session. So we're going to hear from 3 experts who are working locally to advance innovative approaches to preserving and expanding local tree canopy. Each speaker will talk about how their partnerships, action plans, and grassroots connections helped to create the conditions for sustainable urban forest stewardship. So very excited to welcome on the line Frank Rodgers at the Cacapon Institute in West Virginia. We're excited to hear their creative approach to partnerships. Cody Kiefer out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he'll be talking about Lancaster's Urban Forest Action Plan and some of the results that we're able to yield from that plan. And also Ryan Alston, who's with the Baltimore Tree Trust, who will talk a little bit more about how their community engagement approach is unique, given that it has workforce development elements that help their work become sustainable. And so I will ping it over to Frank to get us started.
Thank you, Sarah. Cacapon Institute since 1985, from the Cacapon River to the Potomac to the Chesapeake Bay. Our mission is to protect rivers and watersheds using science and education. And most of our education these days is in the form of hands-on education. We're engaging communities in planting trees, not only to protect our watersheds, but also to improve air quality, to fight the heat island effect, advance equity, environmental equity, and all of the other great ecosystem benefits provide. And here in this map, this is a map of some of our projects, actually most of our projects. We have had more than 600 planting events in the last 10 years. And this is the area of the Upper Potomac. So the 8 counties of West Virginia that are in the Chesapeake Bay. We also do a little bit of work in Western Maryland and down into the Shenandoah Valley. We serve on the education and forestry work groups at the Chesapeake Bay program. That's a little background on Cacapon Institute. Personally, I started in this as a professional with the Parks and People Foundation in Baltimore after being a volunteer with the Tree Tribe in Baltimore starting from 1996. So I have a little experience in the inner city area. And what I want to point out here on this map, which you can't really see at this scale, it is a little known fact that the I-81 corridor, where you see that just bunch of tree projects on the right-hand side of your screen, that's the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. It's the I-81 corridor. It is part of the Hancock urban area of the U.S. Census Bureau. It has the fastest rate of urban land cover growth in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The urban area between 2000 and 2010, the urban area grew by 73% and the population grew by 52%. And that the area is growing faster than the population is indicative of sprawl. And you can go to the next scene on our website, please. I didn't prepare slide presentations for this. My goal is to spend about 10 minutes talking with you and sharing what we do here at Cacapon Institute. And I really appreciate Julie's invitation and the group's invitation to speak. I don't really think of myself as an innovator in this area, but I do have some things I'd like to share with you. Oh, stay right there. Go back up to the top a little bit. And what I want to point out is that ethnically, West Virginia is pretty homogeneous, but we have a great deal of generational poverty here in West Virginia. All of those students, all of those kids you see in the top slide bar there, they are all on food assistance. All of our kids in the 8 counties of the Panhandle here are on food assistance of some kind or another. So poverty is generational poverty is something that Cacapon Institute is very interested in fighting. And one of the things that we like to do here at Cacapon Institute, we are a staff of 3 full-time and 2 part-time people covering 8 counties of West Virginia. So we have to steward our resources a great deal. And one of the ways we figured out to do that, we heard folks earlier today, talking about community organizing and community building, and those are fantastic. Those are absolutely fantastic. And the way that we try to do that here at Cacapon Institute is we work through existing communities. So we work with faith-based organizations, schools, homeowner associations, neighborhood associations, small towns, and Roriton clubs, Lions clubs, volunteer fire departments, all kinds of community organizations that already exist. And what we do is we try to co-opt their social infrastructure. So we try to, we look at land cover data and we look at socioeconomic information on EJ Screen, and we reach out to these communities and try to educate, and then we educate them on the benefits of trees, and we try to co-opt them and recruit them to work with us to plant trees. So we bring the arboriculture knowledge, we bring the trees and materials. We do not pass out cash grants, because our fear was, if we start sharing this federal money down into these groups, we did not want them to then find themselves going to the marketplace and competing with each other and driving the prices up. So what we do is we work with them to create planting plans, and then we provide them with the technical assistance that they need and the materials that they need, the trees, the tree protectors, and we primarily are planting trees in containers from 5 to 7 gallons. And we work with these groups, and we rely on them and their social infrastructure to organize the volunteers and pull together the resources that they need to transport these trees from our depot locations, where the nursery delivers them to us, and then the communities pick them up and take them back to their communities. And I really appreciated Mrs. Richardson's her phrase earlier today, the dignity of communications. And that's really what we try to do. We try to empower these groups by empathizing with them, by bringing what resources we have to them. And what we found is that this is really effective for us, because while these communities are trapped in generational poverty, many of them, their social infrastructure is just phenomenal. It's amazing, the energy and the resources and the organizational and communication skills that these groups have. So we rely on them for that. One of the things I'd like to say for groups, if in the funding sense of things, look around and see what private landscapers are charging. We had been working on, we gather up all the hours of our volunteers and give them a match for that. But what we learned was that actually in the marketplace, planting a 7-gallon tree here in West Virginia costs $390. So that's a fantastic match for every tree that we plant. And I want to say for schools, put your foot in the door at schools. The under 18 population in America on average is 22%. So if you're not working with schools, you're missing a huge population. So I encourage you to do that. Also, by working through neighborhoods, you can serve the elderly communication or population that can't plant their own trees. So that's a great thing with working with neighborhood associations. And I think, Sarah, I saw a 2-minute warning flash by.
Yes, now a minute.
Okay, that's great. So those are the big things for us. We are now working, our focus now is on what we call tree giveaways. We find sponsors, we use our targeting to find communities that need our help because they have low canopy and they might be in economically disadvantaged communities. And then we find resources, perhaps it's public works, a local bank. There's lots of groups that will help donate and help us make the match so we can provide trees to those groups. And that's the way we work it here at Cacapon Institute. We have lots of repeat groups, and we're very pleased and proud of the organizations that we work with. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Frank. Really great lessons learned there from your experience. I know that that's going to be helpful for a lot of folks because there are so many similar communities across the watershed that are suffering from generational poverty challenges as well, and giving them that additional boost of capacity can be a game changer. So thank you for sharing out your work. All right, I'll ping it to Cody, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what's going on in Lancaster.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm the urban forester for the city of Lancaster. I've been in place for 1.5 years at this point. And really the launching point for the creation of this position was an urban forest action plan that the city adopted in October of 2020. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes trying to give a high level view of what this action plan was or is, and what the benefits may be, because I feel like it's an accessible tool for any municipality of any level and location to be able to develop for themselves. Not quite as intensive as a master plan, but can put you in a position for some real action and community support. So next slide, please. So just a little bit of context for the city of Lancaster. We're a smaller city. We're a historical city with aging infrastructure, population of around 60,000 people in what is otherwise a 2 mile by 2 mile square with a couple of annexes. And our population density can reach levels akin to Taipei, Taiwan even. Demographically, a relatively young population here, though our fastest growing populace is retirement age folks over 65, highly diverse, and relatively impoverished as well. So I think, the latest figure I heard was around 25% of our population lives at or below the poverty levels. Bigger scope picture than that, we're under a consent decree. We have been since about 2017. So a lot of my prioritization is driven by stormwater, though we try not to ignore that. And that's one benefit of the action plan here as well. Next slide, please. We also, in Pennsylvania, being a Dillon rule state, are limited in our ability for like revenue generation and that sort of stuff. And I'll touch on that a little bit here. So a little bit more context. We have had, various tree-centric actions in our storied history here. So the Shade Tree Commission, which oversees all the trees and public spaces around the city, was established in the 60s. We have been a Arbor Day Foundation, Tree City USA recognized community for 46 years and counting. We have a relatively progressive trees ordinance that was adopted in 2014, and many other municipalities have modeled their ordinances after a tree manual that provides additional, standard support for that. And then, of course, the action plan that was launched in 2020. So next slide, please. So essentially this action plan, as Lancaster developed it, is a 96-page document, 6 chapters, a few appendices, but is otherwise a document with the intent of exposing the barriers to a verdant urban forest and then providing some broad initiatives and priorities for how to surpass those barriers and move forward into a resilient and sustainable city model. Chapter 1, was just setting the basis based on, at the time of writing, a rather outdated data set. And so in this case, it's about 10 years old, the street tree inventory and the UTC analysis. So that was a great, first start, not only in where are we as a city, but also we really need to update this data. The benefits of the urban forest was chapter 2. We all know that. I think everyone here is probably speaking on that day to day with those around us, but it's important to get that as context in the document. Tree management and operations really get into how are we trying to accomplish our goals for the urban forest and what do we need to actually achieve that budgetarily, staffing wise and all of that. And then policy and ordinance review is what it sounds like. And then ultimately conclusions, recommendations. So I'll give you some snippets from all of that in a couple of slides here. But yeah, a powerful document and just creating a quick synopsis of where we are and where we want to go. I think, it has been a tool set that has first created my position and then allowed me to really launch into a momentum that was gained well before I was in place. So next slide, please. So just trying to write down some of the benefits as I see it to share with you is that this was, in our case, it was written by a non-subject matter expert staff member. So it can be in your situation too. It can also be fully outsourced. So you might have seen in that snapshot before that Davie Resource Group contributed to our action plan. They and many others offer these sorts of services. So if you're a smaller municipality, you don't have an arborist, urban forest, or any similar staff, you can still make this happen. It does establish and codify a municipal value set, which is important. So I get to hold accountable the administration if and when, there are competing priorities for, the resources that I need for the management of my program. It's a great resource for grants. So I did use this in gaining $500,000 in funding last year for some urban forestry projects. It's nice to show that the city stands behind this value set and, kind of demonstrate where our priorities are. It provides a foundation for future planning and action. So I try to link all of my programmatic actions back to the foundation of this urban forest action plan. It identifies gaps and priorities, and neither is exclusive of the other. I think they're both important for an action plan. It's publicly accessible, so the public can access this. I don't think it's the most empowering document because it's broad enough to not be able to, really hold people accountable. So we say we want more trees, but we're not yet saying where those trees need to be prioritized, where the resources need to be allocated, who has, who does not have, those sorts of things. That'll be the next step with a master plan. But ultimately, as I see it, the main benefit is accountability. So I did present to City Council 2 weeks ago on what work I have done in the year and a half that I've been in position. And I spent a lot of that time reminding them up front of, this is not just me doing work based on my individual recognition of needs for the city. It is a comprehensive, it is a comprehensive value set, again, that ultimately all city administration signed off on. So next slide, please. So we'll go through a few excerpts here because I think our action plan touches on a few things that this roundtable has touched on as well. Next slide, please. Yep, there we go. So yeah, just pulling out a few screenshots from the action plan here. When we're talking about equity, so there's some really nice statements in here, and I think they could have gone into more detail, but it gets to a point of all people, regardless of socioeconomic or racial background, should be guaranteed access to trees and the green spaces where trees are often found. Trees are for all people, and all people need trees. So this is my mantra that I've been able to adopt largely because of this. When we're talking about climate resilience and climate action, this plan ties back to the municipal climate action plans. We're talking about the needs for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon offsets, those sorts of things. The action plan is there and talking about how urban forest management addresses some of these needs. Next, please. So then when we get to the conclusions, I love some of the nice, broad statement or I guess direct statements that are being made. So, the city will never meet its UTC goals without financial support. I think we could all use more budget, but if the city is serious about growing and preserving its urban forest, it must be creative and innovative in funding the program. So it goes into more detail about how to get to those funds. Next, please. So staffing, when I was in some of the breakout sessions yesterday, I think this is one of the most commonly recognized limitations to our programming, right, is we never have enough staffing. Well, I'm one person amongst 90,000 trees and 60,000 residents at this point. So it's nice to know that the action plan has made amendment for, the ability to grow our staffing to the needs that we need it in the city. And now I get to constantly remind those above me that this is what is planned out. And so hopefully we'll be able to grow that very soon. Next, please. And then municipal management. So really, because we are in a Dillon Rule state, we're limited in our resource or revenue generation. And so ultimately the city of Lancaster places street tree responsibility and sidewalks in the public space. They put the burden of responsibility on the abutting property owner. So we recognize that, and that's the nice thing about this plan. It recognizes it as well, that the only way that we can be fully empowered to make the gains that we're looking to make, we need to adopt full responsibility for trees in the public spaces. So that's a good goal for us to constantly shoot towards. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the priority matrix, and it's in Technicolor here for you, but you can see the 5 objectives that are here, the actions that are linked to achieving each objective, and then the priority sequence and the outcome. So it's nice to stepping into this role and being able to constantly look back at what the priorities are at the city level, and be able to not only hold others accountable, but be held accountable myself to that which was created, by this community, or I guess the city level process of developing this action plan. Next slide, please. So there was a budget developed. So if we were to take on all street tree management, what would that budget look like? This is far outdated with current prices and things, but it gives some nice background. So the action plan can utilize a lot of resources to build its objective. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we're currently updating our ordinance. So far, I've been able to do a street tree inventory update, a UTC analysis update. We're currently updating our ordinances, some permitting overhauls and audits. We've done a lot in just a year and a half at this point. Next slide, please. and looking forward to a lot more. So I'll wrap it up with kind of the limitations. There's a lot of great stuff that can happen with an action plan. I think it's achievable by any municipality, but I want to remind us that, you know, it is a policy document only. It's not going to do the work and the management. So there does need to be an administrative oversight piece that's brought in as well. It doesn't have to be a staff member like myself. It can be a shade tree commission. It can be a nonprofit partner. It can be whoever is ready to take on this objective of bringing about a healthy and verdant urban forest for all, and holding, you know, your municipality accountable. You do need resources for immediate next steps. You have to maintain the momentum. So this can't sit on a proverbial dusty shelf and not be utilized, of course. And then you must be couched within comprehensive scope of plans and initiatives. So it needs to not just tear apart what's being done as being ineffective and inefficient. It needs to provide solutions. And then lastly, it ultimately is just a temporary foundation for the ultimate urban forest master plan. What the action plan doesn't do is say, we want X tree cover goal, we want this amount of tree density, we want these many trees per street mile, this many trees per resident, that sort of thing. So that's the next step, but that's a far more, as we saw in the Tree Philly presentation this morning, that involves a lot more resources than a lot of us are ready initially. So this action plan is a good first step for getting to that point. So next, please. Happy to answer questions, make contacts, and please utilize our action plan as a model for those that you may be developing. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Cody. Excited to see what comes of your tenure. You just got there, so I'm sure that there's plenty in the action plan to set you up with, and we'll look forward to hearing your reports out in coming years. And so I'll ping it over to Ryan, who will share with us some more about what's happening in Baltimore.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Alston, Communications and Outreach Director for the Baltimore Tree Trust. I'll just start in saying I'm really excited to not only be a part of this panel, but just have the opportunity to join the roundtable. I admittedly don't have a lot of background or education in environmentalism or, tree advocacy, but it's me being able to be in these spaces and hear from so many experts that I'm able to really just grow my skill set and kind of share a little bit more about our organization and our work. So I do appreciate that. But I'm here to talk about the Tree Trust today. We are a local nonprofit out of Baltimore City, really working to increase the tree canopy across the city, across Baltimore neighborhoods. We were founded in 2008 by a group of women who were working in neighborhoods and really identified the need for communities to have access to green spaces, livable, green and actionable spaces. And so they created the Tree Trust. And ever since then, we've been able to really just grow and increase our impact to create a greener and healthier city. We are a Black-led organization, which is something that's really exciting in these themes of tree equity and creating a more equitable city and environment. I'm really excited that we are a Black-led organization and minority ran and are able to really provide that kind of different perspective of what's needed for these Black and Brown communities across Baltimore City. We are also for Baltimore and by Baltimore. So we're developing a local workforce of local city residents, which I'll get to a little later in my talk. But our neighborhood foresters are year-round, in-house urban foresters who are planting teams, and they're directly in these communities working to create large impacts through trees. So next slide. Just a little bit of information about our numbers. Since 2008, we've been able to plant over 17,000 trees, focusing specifically in those minority neighborhoods in areas really affected by disenfranchisement and disinvestment. Really exciting, our spring planting season just kicked off yesterday, and we're on a mission to plant 3,000 trees by June. So a large goal, but it's something that I'm sure our team is definitely able to manage. Over our years of growth, we've been not only able to expand our team, but just expand the number of services and the impact that we're able to create. So we're not only looking at the actual physical number of trees that we're planting in these communities, but we're able to, we're also looking at removing concrete and impervious surfaces and transitioning that into viable tree wells that are able to be planted. So we've been able to remove over 100,000 square feet of impervious surfaces and transform that into new tree wells and homes for new trees, as well as expanding existing tree wells to create spaces that are large enough for these trees to really sustain. Really exciting this year. Hopefully we'll be able to add stump grinding to our services as well. And so that's a question that we get a lot from communities is, do you remove dead trees? Are you able to help with these stumps around the community? And so that's another way that we're able to really increase our impact and expand our impact as well. And like I talked about with our neighborhood forestry initiative, we were really volunteer-based when we started in 2008, and we were able to transition that into a viable career workforce and career pathways I just lost my train of thought, to introduce residents into this idea of urban forestry and to this idea of green sector jobs that a lot of residents just don't know much about just because of the communities that they're in. And so expanding our neighborhood forestry initiative to involve residents in this greening mission that's really needed for Baltimore City. Next slide. So most of what I'll talk about in these next few slides is echoes a lot of what we've heard today, themes of environmental justice and redlining and building a community impact. So if you didn't know, Baltimore City, unfortunately, was one of the blueprint cities for a lot of the redlining practices that were spread across the United States. And so we're seeing a lot of those redlining practices really still reverberating in these communities. We're seeing that through culmination of food deserts, poverty, higher rates of homelessness, lack of equitable healthcare, elevated crime rates. And as we can see in the next slide, we're seeing that in the amount of equitable tree cover that is really affecting the communities of Baltimore City. So this overlay graphic really shows kind of the disparities that we see that is a result of redlining. You can kind of see the redlining in the central part of Baltimore, which is also, there's a term deemed the black butterfly, which really shows the concentration of minority and Black and brown communities in the city compared to a lot of the outlying neighborhoods that are closer to the city lines that have a lot more tree cover, a lot more green spaces. And so this graphic really shows, I think is really great at showing kind of the history of redlining and how that has really culminated into the lack of tree cover that we're seeing specifically in these Black and brown communities. And so at the Tree Trust, this is what we're working to reverse, right? We have the ability to recognize that Baltimore City was the blueprint for a lot of these practices that caused a lot of disinvestment in a lot of the communities. And so we're able to kind of transform that with trees. And that's really exciting. We're able to kind of let residents know this is, where you're coming from, but this is what we're trying to build. We're trying to build a healthier picture for our neighbors for futures to come. So one way we're really doing that is through connecting with community stakeholders. I kind of talked about this in one of the breakout panels, but we're able to connect and do the outreach that's needed for community residents to really create that buy-in and create a larger picture of the tree planting impact that we want. Residents are going to know what's going to be best for their communities. They're going to know what their neighbors want. And we're able to listen to them and take that into account when we're building these larger planting plans and say, okay, this tree can go here, but this tree may be a hindrance in this part of the neighborhood. And so those residents are able to give us that information and create a more viable tree care plan, because we can plant all these trees, but without the input of the community, they're not going to sustain, they're not going to last. And so our main goal is to plant as many trees as we can, but also care for them and make sure that they are sustaining and lasting for the community. Next slide. So along with our community outreach and engagement and educating residents in general, we're able to build a diverse green workforce by introducing residents to a viable career option. We're able to welcome these residents and introduce them into this green forestry sector and provide them with a year-round employment opportunities that, they're able to gain skills, they're able to kind of take what they've learned and share that with their own communities. And so these are residents who are directly from the communities that we're working with, and they take a lot of pride in doing the work that they're doing because they're seeing the change and impact that it's making. So just the next slide shows our kind of breakdown of the neighborhood forestry pathways, and our workforce development manager, Dave, he does a really great job at identifying what everyone's kind of unique skill set or interest is. So if you have the skill set or interest directly in planting, there's pathways that can help you with that. If you have interest in doing the outreach and canvassing, there are pathways to kind of build into that. And it really allows residents and our neighborhood foresters to build a career pathway that matches for them. They're able to grow within our organization, but also take the skills that they've learned and transfer that to some of our other partner organizations. I know Darren is here from Blue Water Baltimore. One of our neighborhood foresters was able to take the skill set that he had with our organization and transfer that into a position at Blue Water Baltimore. And so it's just those different opportunities that we're really open to sharing with residents and providing them that source and access and resource that's really needed to create a greener Baltimore. So that's all I have today. I think I'm out of my time, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Baltimore Tree Trust in general. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan. Really fantastic guidance from the panel. We do have a little bit of time set aside for, do we have time for Q&A? Yes, we do. And so thank you all for, I think we're at least one or two questions in the chat. But I know, I think it was really exciting to see such different work, all advancing the same cause, but different mechanisms of how to get that done, right? And so one of the questions that came through was, I think for Frank, about how do you get trees watered in the summer at the schools? What does the capacity look like when in the time of highest heat in the communities that you serve?
We rely primarily on the school groups that we have worked with to plant the trees with the students. Many of our campuses are, well, all of the schools, because many of the students are dependent on the lunchtime, the school lunches through the summer, they have programming. So we've started developing a program we have now at a half a dozen schools that we call Tree Doctors. We work primarily with elementary and middle school students on this program, and they get to learn a little bit about tree biology. And during the summer months, they'll go out and doctor their trees. So they'll water them, they'll mulch them, they'll look out for troubles. We do an annual inspection of all the tree plantings that we've done, keeping up with them for the first 3 years and then periodically after that. And despite the deer pressure and despite the lack of professional watering and maintenance, we still find that weed whacking and mowing is our biggest killer. So, and the problem is that our school systems use contractors and they turn over every year. So we got to start over again every year, teaching the contractors to stop running into the trees and stop whacking the trees. Watering is a tough nut to crack. That is absolutely true. Water's heavy. School grounds are expansive, and I am always open to ideas. But a 55-gallon truck, a 55-gallon barrel on the back of a pickup truck with 5-gallon buckets with holes in the bottom is still our primary go-to.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Cody, for folks who are representing communities or who have an interest in supporting communities that are of similar size to Lancaster, right? But maybe are a couple steps out from even creating an action plan. What kind of guidance or what kind of top of mind steps would you guide or advise them to take to prepare them for action? Because not everybody's super coordinated or has all their stuff together. And I know that you're like the first official urban forestry staff, right, for the city. And so, for folks who aren't quite there yet, what would you share with them?
I mean, yeah, I guess it depends on who's the activator in this case. Are they internal or external to the city? So I've seen it happen from both ends of where, if there's a powerful nonprofit in the community, they can push the city towards certain actions versus, if there's somebody internal to the city, which was our case. So, in our case, we had at various times and at various positions, people who, were driven by a sustainability initiative that, is otherwise inexplicable to, I guess, some other municipalities. And so, by, trial and error and a little bit over time, they started, adding here and there as they had the ability and capacity, since it was never part of their position actually. So, I mean, yeah, it's always going to be herding cats. So it's identifying who is the one that one can drive that cat herding, and then also wants to be able to do it. So yeah, it's difficult to speak about other communities because they're just so different. But yeah, all I can say is there's always somebody that's passionate enough about it. It's just always, and I think that's been some themes from some other presentations here. It's just always trying to find that next person, next connection. So that diamond in the rough is somewhere out there in the community, even if it's not internal to the city. You just have to find them and take the time and make sure that you are honoring those relationships and that pursuit of finding that person. So yeah, I'm currently trying to do that in the city as well. There's only so much that a municipality can do. Ultimately, sustainable urban forest action is always going to be at the community level. That's just the longer term piece. So I'm trying to go out and find those neighborhood level activators as well. So yeah, I definitely don't have those answers, but I think that yeah, if the city has finding that one piece that can be the catalyst at which you can push this through, whether the city has already some climate change or climate action piece, and then piggybacking on that with urban forestry, benefits analysis and moving that forward is also yeah, a good and worthwhile option. You have to find those ends that aren't always easily accessible. So it takes a creative person as well.
Great thoughts. Great thoughts. And for you, Ryan, so many, we haven't spent a ton of time on it today, but, with all of this huge investment in our tree canopy, maintenance, stewardship, expansion, we don't have the people to be able to do all of that right now. Like, I don't know where they're coming from. We do have people who would like career switches and jobs and things. And, from the Tree Trust's experience, what has made the difference to be able to help folks bridge the gap from participating in a program to actually landing those positions, right? And actually continuing their green careers, because, now more than ever, we're needing folks who are passionate about this work. So curious about your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, hiring in general is hard. It's hard for us to find neighborhood foresters. I think, each season we do these hiring calls, we do social media blasts to get people to come out, and we may get a handful of people who, aren't necessarily, it's proven to last. And so it's difficult to find those individuals who want to make that difference, who want to have this viable career in urban forestry. But I think it just goes back again to the education piece that's so important. We have to engage communities and get them to understand how important trees are and how important sustainability is. And I think in a lot of the Black and Brown communities, there are so many other things to worry about that environmentalism is kind of the last thing on their list. And so with a lot of the organizations that we work with, that engagement piece and that education piece is really kind of one of the driving points, because it introduces residents to this idea in this sector that they may not have any access to or understanding of. And so that engagement and education piece right on the ground level with community members, just to get them to start thinking in a different way about how they can be advocates for healthier communities in general. And that starts to get them to think about, okay, maybe I could come out to some volunteer events. Maybe I can start getting involved with a lot of these organizations, and then that kind of transfers them to thinking about it as a viable career, a sustainable career.
Excellent, wonderful. We had just a quick follow-up for you on that, Ryan. How do you fund the program? how does that work?
Yeah, so our forestry initiative is funded a lot through grants. So we have a development manager and director who really focus on getting a lot of those grants to not only support our tree planting operations, but they also help fund the year-round employment of our neighborhood foresters. So we're really mostly grant-based. We do receive some funding from governmental funds, but we're really solely grant-based and are writing in a lot of the grant applications to support the funding of that employment side.
Got it. Wonderful. And also for you, Frank, about your particular model, when you were describing it, you almost reminded me of like a tool store or like a Home Depot of some sort, right? And people in the community say, all right, I need this particular tool because this is what we're trying to do. And then, the Cacapon Institute is able to be there to provide that, right? We need new trees, or we need watering, or we need this, or we need that. And you kind of all are like a one-stop shop almost. I'm curious for those who would like to kind of follow in that model and replicate that in their communities. What do you think has kind of been part of your secret sauce of success to sustain, your efforts, because you guys have been at this for a minute?
Well, for folks who are familiar with Dr. Williams Sullivan's work on studying the social benefits and mental health benefits of trees, you're aware that there's an ever stronger body of proof that shows there is a causal relationship between good mental health and positive social outcomes and tree canopies. So what we were trying to do when we work with the municipalities, I've heard it said that trees are often first on the last list for municipal leaders. And what we got to do is reverse that. We got a paradigm shift, because if you put the trees in, you get all those other benefits. You have better mental health, you have lower heat island, you have less stormwater runoff pollution, so many positive social outcomes from planting trees. So what we look at our tree canopy maps, and then we figure out avenues to get down into those communities that need trees. And we try to co-opt the leaders in those communities, and then they become our champions. And we help them organize their tree programs and provide them technical, along with West Virginia Division of Forestry, Urban and Community Forestry Council. We help them organize programs so they can get more trees out into their communities. And there's, other than, again, that great phrase, the dignity of communications. I think that's the secret sauce, if you will, Sarah. That's exactly it. Speaking to people honestly, acknowledging their needs, acknowledging the problems, and allowing them to be not just participants, but drivers in improving their own communities and their own lives. And that's how it works. That's where it works. And if I could, just for a minute, Sarah, I really appreciated what you said, that it's important that we don't channel supplies to communities that already have resources. I have long railed against the match requirements, because I am in West Virginia, in the poorest state in the nation, and just across the Potomac River is Montgomery County, the richest county in the country. And I'm being forced to compete equally with them for financial resources when I have no way to make the kind of match that Maryland and Montgomery County, I mean, more power to them, but we've got to break that paradigm, because I strongly believe, and I have witnessed that if you give people the tools that they need, they will figure it out. Poor communities, they don't have cash, but they got brains and they got resources and they got spirit. And if we just get out of their way and give them the resources that they need, they will change the world.
That was so inspiring, Frank. It's so true. It's so true. I was like, okay, Frank is preaching right now. Let me, somebody pass the offering plate. This is killer. But yeah, so true, so true. And so, yeah, you know, speaking of, everybody says, you know, you need to have money to make money, right? Or you need to have some kind of resource or have some kind of value to make it, right? And a lot of the times, in communities that have been historically marginalized, under-resourced, under-invested in, or have had active disinvestment go on, right, through redlining, other kinds of practices, there just isn't a wide perception that there is value in the communities, right? There's a wide perception both inside of these communities and then outside of these communities that, oh, there's no value there. Oh, it's next to an incinerator. There's no value there. Oh, this is an abandoned factory town. There's no value there, right? But there is value, and it's hidden in the people, right? It's in the people. And so we have a huge, amazing opportunity right now to channel their inherent value and say, we see you, we recognize you, and we're going to be here to partner with you to elevate your priorities and make whatever you want for your tree canopy to come true, right? Whatever dreams you have to manifest, right? And with that, I'll end on one last question for Cody here. Given that you guys are at this new phase of having a staff person, getting some plans on the books, is there capacity that you all were able to receive, or partnerships from outside of the jurisdiction, outside of Lancaster, that has been helpful? Maybe attendance at like professional workshops or conferences, things that basically by investing in yourselves, you can then sustain your efforts over time, because there's going to be a lot of towns that are going to see this funding and these funding announcements come out, and they're going to be like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know how to make the best of all of this, right? And people are going to get really excited, but what we don't want is to kind of light the match and have it die immediately because, you know, of mismanagement, or because people didn't take the necessary action planning steps to sustain their work, right, and set themselves up well. Have there been any resources that have been helpful for you as you kind of build that groundwork in Lancaster?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And you still might be learning, so it may be a bit too big of a question, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question for somebody. Yeah, I'm honestly not that sure, you know, and not entirely sure if I'm following the direction of your question, but I will say, you know, that it is a very somewhat lonely place, you know, to actually build out professional capacity for urban foresters. I'll say that and let it be, you know, as controversial as anybody will let it be. You know, what I am realizing is that it's, you know, I'm not an arborist. I'm not I took arboriculture, but urban forestry is completely different. So the capacity piece, you know, I'm excited for organizations like the Society of American Foresters, who's actually developing a certified or certification credential and all that as well. So yeah, I mean, that piece, I feel like it becomes a rather lonely journey when you're actually, because in our case, while we may be a small city, we do actually have a city arborist, and the urban, you know, I get confused for the arborist all the time, and a lot of our work overlaps, but to actually embrace the urban forest piece, yeah, isn't always a clear-cut, road for people to navigate down. So even trying to find what would make for a good urban forester or a good teammate, you know, I'm starting to lean far more onto the American planning association or planners association than I am anything else, because the forethought and the planning and the initiatives piece and all that needs to come to fruition, just as much as I am looking for, any other, on the ground sort of staff as well. So definitely a lot of technicians and those pieces as well. So that may or may not get to your question. Sorry, it's
no, that's great. That's great. The reason I asked you this is because in a lot of the breakouts, as I was breakout room hopping throughout our event, there was a mention of the need for staff capacity, right? And so, we are talking about making investments in communities that have historically not seen those kinds of investments, which is going to require us also investing in ourselves, right? Investing in the infrastructure of the people who are tasked with doing this work and carrying it out. And so I appreciate your candidness and, for all of the panelists sharing your successes with everybody on the line here. So helpful. We're going to tee everybody up for your final discussion session, which is kind of cumulative. We're going to talk about all the things that you heard over the past 2 days, and we're going to do so strategically by jurisdiction. So everybody will be separated into rooms according with everybody else who's also in your state, or if you're in DC. DC is not a state right now. So, but yeah, so the goal is to identify specific solution pathways along those three kind of complementary tracks: policy, funding, and then also program, so that we can walk away with tangible action steps. And you can do that knowing that other folks from your jurisdiction are all on the same page as well. And so I will hand you off to your groups. I think that sorting is happening automatically. If not, just definitely choose your jurisdiction. For some folks who don't ascribe to a jurisdiction, you'll be able to choose which room you'll be in. And then we'll come back together at the end for a report out, so we can hear what our neighbors are doing all across the watershed. And so as a reminder to the facilitators of each group, be ready to share or have, designate a person, if it's not you as a facilitator, to share out one action or strategy that got a lot of energy in your room when we come back together. And so, I'll send you all off to the races, and we'll look forward to hearing the results in our report out. We are coming back in action. Robust conversations, very engaged conversations at the state and jurisdiction level with everybody. So thank you for your input and your willingness to put your heads together to talk about some of these solution pathways. I'm gonna just call folks out in random order, so there's no particular order to it, but would love to hear some of the solution pathways that you all came up with. Hopefully you did assign your report out person that may be the facilitator. It may be another person that you all decided on, but I'm going to go ahead and start with the one breakout room I did not get to, which is Maryland. So Maryland, would love to hear thoughts from you all and your team about solutions. We're picking one solution to report out on, and hopefully we'll be able to get through all the states.
Okay, well, we did not organize ourselves to pick the one thing because we were so in it. We were in it. We were in the mode of creative problem solving. So I'll just wrap everything up with a bow that stuck out to me in the conversation. So we talked about the real need for native tree stock especially in urban areas, because with these broader goals and the need for more tree plantings to fill all those spaces in paved surfaces, we need the tree stock. So we had some conversation around working with perhaps cooperative agreements between nonprofit organizations who are based in community and found in community that can work with the State Forest Service to perhaps grow out, have some nursery grow out locations in urban areas that will help to create jobs and a revenue source for those organizations, and also provide for resources and understanding within the community of the importance of these trees, which are homegrown and then planted in their neighborhood, combined with this idea of incentivizing the preservation and care of those trees. So the longer term maintenance and really caring for the trees in a community that are otherwise not protected unless there's a local ordinance. So perhaps paying something like an easement fee to keep that tree protected in perpetuity, or at least for a longer term than just a couple of years. So those are some of the ideas that perked up out of the Maryland conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Love solutions to get that land, get that stock up. I mean, it's about to be a real thing. And then of course, protection via easements, fantastic policy solution there. Okay. So moving on from Maryland, let's jump north to Pennsylvania. What were some of the solutions, or one solution, or like very brief to something like that, solutions that came out of your discussion?
Sure. Yeah. So we talked a lot about, hurdles, of course. And I think that some of the big hurdles that we talked about were just surrounding kind of technical assistance and education of not just communities, but also of our decision makers, our policymakers, folks at state levels. And so we really kind of landed on just the need in Pennsylvania to work more collaboratively so that we can access more of our strengths and lean on each other more whenever we acknowledge, we have a weakness as an organization. There's a lot of folks in Pennsylvania at the state, local, and nonprofit group levels that are trying to access a lot of funding and really competing for all of that funding themselves. And we really feel like if we can work together more, we'll be able to make a lot more change happen in Pennsylvania.
Collaboration is the name of the game. Yep, fantastic. Let's head south to Virginia. What's going on in Virginia? What came up for you all in your discussion?
Thanks. I'm the voluntold volunteer. I'm going to just take my cue from our first report out group that didn't choose one. So I'm going to just go really fast. We're a Dillon rule state. The 31 states are a Dillon rule state, but Virginia is like the super duper Dillon rule state. We can't do anything unless the legislature says we can. So we have a cap on the percent tree canopy we can set. We also identified a problem of lack of labor force to plant trees, urban trees, as well as buffer trees along streams, lack of incentives to preserve trees on site for the development community, and utility scale solar, removing large tracts of forest area. Solutions then, of course, we need to have more incentives for land conservation for the development community. And we identified one example. There is was a study group to look at trees as a best management practice. And we're waiting for our DEQ to hurry up and adopt that standard they agreed to do in the year 2023, I now understand. We also need to build a really persuasive information base for our legislature because they just don't think trees are that important. So we have been making run at legislative changes for years now without progress, and also to get our Chesapeake Bay Commission members involved early in any legislative efforts. And there were more solutions, but I'm trying to behave slightly.
Yes, ambitious list from the Virginia group, but yes, all really important pieces here. Thank you for that report out. Let's go east to Delaware. What happened in Delaware?
We met new people. Believe it or not, there's new folks on this call. And for Delaware being such a very small state, I met new people. So I'm glad to have them in that group. We talked about incentivizing development practices to avoid forest clearing so that we're not affecting our overall canopy loss. So we discussed exploring high density development applications just to minimize that and minimize our development impacts. We talked about state tree preservation funds and trying to preserve our old growth forests. We discussed aligning our shared goals from all of our partners. So looking at environment, housing, economic, climate data, looking at our WIPs, our local goals, state and Fed goals, and can we align those goals to share that with everyone on how well we're achieving them? One of our barriers we discussed was match and having local funding or local contributions to be able to aid us in these efforts. An idea was tossed around to use state funds to add tree planting projects for those local towns that fall under our downtown development districts. So that's a new opportunity that we could explore. And then we just need to ensure that all of our projects are well maintained. And I know we've heard this over the last 2 days, but we need a trained workforce with adequate funding to maintain these projects, ensure that they're surviving. And then we need trained individuals to look for new opportunities. And we're hoping, additional opportunities with the Tree for Every Delawarean initiative that'll just hopefully increase our tree canopies. And then hopefully then we can recognize the importance of conserving our old growth forests too. So that's what I have.
Excellent. Thanks, Marcia. Wonderful. Would love to hear from the folks in New York. What were some of the solutions that you all discussed there?
Yeah, so we had pretty good discussion. We didn't really put together a pathway, but we had some very good discussion about the complexity of the problem and how hard it can be to prioritize what to work on. And there was discussion about the need to get better technical assistance and education, both at the state level and at the local community level. So one of the issues that came up was the challenge of applying for grants, and that communities really need to get more support to be able to apply. And also the whole issue of new funding coming available and the challenge of figuring out what's available both at the state level and at the local level, and how to address this. And that sometimes it's better to keep funding what's already working and not just having to figure out how to apply for new sources of funding. Then the other issue that came up was that it would be that ties into the complexity of the problems and the need for technical capacity, was maybe having a manual of best management practices that can be applied for New York, and that can be put together for New York, and that can provide guidance to technicians and to local officials, and ways on how to target and apply for funding. And then one thing that was mentioned is that for New York, there is a new bond act, which I'm not very familiar with, but the whole issue of how to incorporate all these discussions around tree canopy and equity into the funding that will become available through this act. So yeah, I think that's a summary of what was discussed in our meeting.
Wonderful. Bonds are great. Bonds are helpful. So that's a really, it's kind of an old and very slept on way of amassing funding for public institutional benefit. So great to hear that. Let's jump to DC and see what happened out of the DC discussion as well.
I think Mike may have volunteered me. Mike, did you want to go, or do you want me to report?
Yes, go ahead, Stella.
I got volunteered, so I'm Stella. Hello, everyone again. So we had a very rich discussion, even though we were a small group. But one of the things that came up is that we think that DC should kind of move beyond the middle when thinking about policy programs and funding, And when we move beyond the middle, we think that DC will need to become much more hyper-local strategically and also regional. So paying attention to the community and neighborhood scale for support and education and technical assistance, but at the same time, having a wider regional awareness of how tree policies and green space policy really connects to the region. And specifically, I feel guilty, I'm boosting myself, but members of the discussion agreed that a natural spaces strategy for climate resilience is really important. Right now, we have a lot of thinking in DC that's very siloed by agencies. So we have the trees and the watershed, and then the meadow restoration, and we have the parks green space. We feel that there's a need for more integrated and cross-agency thinking, and specifically a natural spaces strategy for climate resilience, at which of course trees would be central. So we thought that was very important. We all agree that we need to think more about workforce development and workforce support. And also, because so much of the land in DC is publicly owned, to make a difference, we've got to think even more strategically and creatively for private landowners to how to grow the tree canopy, both for new plantings and for stewardships. And we also put a big boost out for civic social capital, such as master naturalists, master gardeners, watershed and tree stewards, and the role that they can play in a sustainable tree canopy, and how that's kind of an untapped resource that DC should look into. Mike, did I get everything?
I believe so, Stella. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Yes. Some of our greatest allies, right, are folks who like to do this in their spare time, in their free time, right? And so being able to capitalize on those interests is important. And so wanted to ping it to West Virginia to close us out of our report outs.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. We talked about the fact that we don't really have carbon credit trading or carbon credit availability in our state, at least not that our team knew about, which definitely shows that that's a gap. But we didn't really want to tackle that for our main project to do the other questions because it's big. And for the other ideas, we thought about looking for opportunities to connect creek buffer habitat in communities, and that would be a great intersection with our state's goals for the WIP, but also those communities that need to be green. And I guess those gaps in the buffers would be kind of random, or maybe, you know, in places that really need a lot more shade and would be disadvantaged. So that would be a great way to work on that. And we have a lot of data about streams that need buffers, so we could start with that and kind of look at an intersection where the tools show that we have a lot of markers for disadvantaged communities. And then we talked a lot about the Tree City USA because we had Bob Hanna with us, and he runs that for West Virginia. And we found that four communities out of 21 incorporated communities that we have in our Bay watershed are now Tree City USA. So that leaves 17 we could work with. And the community tree program has already worked with a lot of those and given them trees and taught them about tree maintenance. So I think they'd be close to signing up. We also have a university that's a Tree Campus USA. So we didn't know that was a thing, and we could work on that with some of the other community colleges that we have. And so that would allow them to get grants for maintenance and more trees. And I think there's going to be some education along with that to help the communities look at their own disadvantaged areas within their boundaries and make sure they're applying that program in a equity way, whatever that adjective would be. So I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Alana. Appreciate the report out. This is this is, I want to kind of put a finer point on one of the solutions that I heard in the West Virginia room that I was like, this is stellar. And it's examples like these that are actually going to take us to the next stratosphere and the next level of tree canopy stewardship. I think it was Frank out of Cacapon mentioned an example of incentivizing farmers, a group of farmers and area residents to indeed take on a riparian buffer project and with the goal of reducing nutrient load. And being able to say, if everybody works together, this is the incentive, right? And having the incentive basically just be a pot of money, right? For folks to actually get that work done. Lo and behold, the work got done. I'll invite Frank to share any more about it. I don't know if that's a case study somewhere or that exists somewhere, but as soon as I listened to that and heard that feedback, I thought, now that is a model that will work. Why? Because we live in a capitalistic society. You know, none of us are in urban forestry, community forestry for money. We're all in it because of various other reasons that have attracted us to this work. I think few people get into the field because they're like, this is going to be the best way that I can put food on the table for my family, right? But most people who are in this space often believe that the space is outside of, or can exist outside of the capitalistic system that we all live in, and it doesn't. It doesn't get sustained without that. And so having worked in the nonprofit space, worked on behalf of public institutions, worked in business for myself as well, I can tell you that for us to actually bring the revolution about that we're hoping for, the solutions that everybody worked so diligently over the past 2 days to jot down, to share out from the hard work that you've all been doing in the field, there is space for all of that. But there will not be success for all of that if we don't incentivize ourselves in alignment with other systems, right? And so there are other fields that people get into, like healthcare, because they care about helping people's, health, and they don't get into it for the money. There's other fields that are kind of causal fields as well, that are similar to working on behalf of nature and the natural environment, and trying to extend the benefits of the natural environment to everybody, which is why we're here, which is what we're trying to do, and we have to figure out a way, a mechanism to continue to motivate other folks who don't maybe necessarily share that same kind of heart and soul for nature, like maybe we all do. We need to find a way to motivate them to help us steward nature, because we cannot do it all even though there's best and brightest minds, right, on this call and who have joined us over the past 2 days. We can't do it alone. We've got to motivate folks who are not tree people to become tree people. And one of the best ways to do that is to incentivize with funding, and incentivize action with funding. And so I wanted to elevate that case study or that example as a way of thinking about how we restructure our policies, how we restructure our funding mechanisms, and what we look for to say, this can't be a certified tree project unless an arborist has evaluated it. It can't? Are we setting ourselves up for failure? Are we setting ourselves up and putting ourselves at the mercy of these check boxes and boundaries that prevent us from being as effective as we can be, right? We want to think outside the box in how we implement all of this work, because we can't educate everybody and think that everybody else knowing about the benefits of trees is going to spur them into action, just as it has maybe spurred us into action, right? It's gonna be different for everybody, but most people can agree on money. So I don't want to. I'm gonna get off my soapbox here, but I did want to take that moment to encourage everybody to reframe your ideas that you had around that as well. So we have a poll which is our after lunch poll. We did not end up getting to it. I completely forgot about it earlier. So thank you, Project Team, for putting it back up. The question is, how tall is the largest known living tree by volume? Did we take this yesterday? We may have taken it yesterday. Oh, we're back up.
I think that was a technical glitch.
Okay, apologies. Apologies, but yeah, so I'm tasked with, I'm coming off the soapbox here, but I'm tasked with it, doing a little bit of recap. So what did we learn? We had 3 themes: climate, tree loss, and equity, and how that turned into local action. I heard a lot from everybody all over about needing support on maintenance, needing support to prioritize the stock of trees, and needing support to limit the pressure that exists with development that threatens trees and threatens to continue the loss numbers that we've been seeing of late. I've also heard a lot about some epic tools and examples of people being successful. So the Climate and Health Action Guide, the Tree Equity Score, the state tracking systems in Maryland, and there's another state that had a tracking score, but I'm forgetting. But there are so many folks who are doing the work to make plain the challenge, but also make plain a pathway to solutions. And I'm so excited about what is to come from these recommendations, right? The project team is going to be doing a lot of work to compile your feedback that you shared in the breakout rooms. Also, some of the feedback that was shared by the presenters in our main rooms as well. You'll all receive the slides after the session as well. And hopefully this will be some more cohesive guidance for policymakers and funders in how to restructure their approaches to supporting your work. And so with that, I'm going to see if Julie, who is part of the project team and I feel like knows everybody, I'm going to turn it over to her to share a little bit more in the reflection piece as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. And I just want to make sure from Brandy and Crystal, are we there? Are we right at the end here? Are we already there?
We are.
Oh my goodness, what an amazingly full couple of days it's been. Thank you all for being so present with our event the last couple of days, showing up fully, participating fully in the breakout rooms. As Sarah mentioned, all of this, all of the ideas, the challenges, the priorities that were shared are going to be documented into something that we can use to both communicate back with you all and your partners and your networks, as well as to Chesapeake Bay program leadership and state leadership, to help form our next round of, or really our first round of state action plans around how we can advance these tree canopy goals, and how we can also turn that into our Bay-wide action plan around what do we need to be focused on in the next 2 years to really advance, what we heard over the last 2 days. I want to share a couple of just big picture announcements regarding how you can stay engaged and keep connecting with this community of practice, this group of folks who are all trying to advance this work at different scales and in different places. We do have the Chesapeake Tree Canopy Network website that is intended to be a hub, a resource hub for you. That is where we shared yesterday the tree canopy status and trend fact sheets at the county scale, but you'll find a host of other community stories on there, resource guides. We try to pull from the latest and greatest that we see out there. And if you see things that aren't there that should be there, please let me know, and we'll make sure that it gets up there. I want to say that the county tree cover fact sheets that we announced yesterday, we said there were some errors in a few of them. You couldn't find them. They're now all corrected, so you should be able to find your county fact sheets. And again, let us know if there's any issues out there once you access them. We'll try to, keep updating as needed. So that's one way to stay engaged, is through the Chesapeake Tree Canopy Network. And then another is that we try to host a Chesapeake Tree Canopy Summit every couple years or so. And that's the one that we'll be hosting this year will be virtual, so that we can really let everyone participate. Sometimes when we meet in one place, we have to limit the number, and it's hard for people to travel to it. So this year's is going to be in multiple virtual sessions, probably this summer. So we will make sure you all get the information about those, the Chesapeake Tree Canopy Summit coming up this summer. And it'll be a chance to kind of keep diving deeper into these themes and broaden it out to, anyone who wants to participate in our practitioner network that, wants to be part of this, these efforts. So stay tuned for that. I wanted to share also that, we heard at the end here about this tree nursery supply needs that are out there. And, this roundtable that you are a part of the last 2 days was funded through the Chesapeake Bay Program's Goal Implementation Team funding pot of money that helps us advance our various Chesapeake outcomes. And so we're just going to be kicking off in the next year a new project such as this around the tree nursery supply. And so stay tuned. We'll be reaching out through networks around that for those of you that work more directly with the tree nursery supply issues. We want to really look at how we can scale up and address all the opportunities that we know, and the needs that we know are there in that sector to meet our goals. Okay, with that, I want to say some thank yous. I want to really thank all of you for participating. I want to thank our speakers who really did a stellar job preparing and presenting in the short amount of time that we gave them, really the highlights, the best of what they've been working on. Thank you so much to all the presenters. I want to thank our many facilitators and note takers in the breakout rooms who are really just volunteers, helping to make this event happen. We really appreciate all the work that you did to prepare and help deliver those breakout sessions. I want to thank our amazing MC, Sarah Sewell, for being here and guiding us through the last 2 days. I always love to be in an event that Sarah is helping to lead, because she just rallies our souls, rallies our spirits, keeps us, it's such a great way of weaving together what we're learning and challenging us at the same time. So Sarah, thank you so much for being our leader these last couple of days and setting such a positive and inspiring tone for our work together. And last, I really, really want to thank our amazing project leaders, Brandy Espinola and Crystal Sheasley, who have been the behind the scenes brains and brawn of this operation for many, many, many months, putting together this event in a super organized way. Really just the greatest wonder team I could ever imagine working with on an event like this. So thank you so much, Brandy and Crystal, for all your hard work to get all the details right and make this really a successful event for everyone. Okay, with that, help me remember, Brandy and Crystal, is there anything else that I'm supposed to cover before we send people off on an inspiring video journey? Did we cover everything?
We do have an evaluation poll Just wanted to double check, and that was my my doing. So part of my responsibility as MC, everybody take the poll, because knowing that these kinds of things are valuable to your work is why they get done. So please do take the poll. The link is in the chat. Thank you, Brandy. That's a layup. Look at that. Look at that pass in the layup. Yes, right there. Anyway,
yeah,
thank you.
please do take the quick start. It's very short, but it will help us know kind of which topics, resonated the most, were most important, valuable for you. And I know that'll be a mix, depending on where you're working in the watershed. So we want to hear all those perspectives through the survey. And yeah, I think that covers us. And if anybody wants to, as you're wrapping up, put something fun in the chat, some takeaway, something you're inspired about leaving after these 2 days. I know we would love to hear it. You can put that in before you check out. And then we're also going to put a slide up on the screen that is, instead of leaving you with a tool, we're going to let the inspiration continue. There's a video on here that we'll also put in the chat about some really awesome work, also in Baltimore around the Still Meadow Peace Park, that I just found to be very inspiring. And I hope you will too. So I think with that, we can sign off. We hope to see you again very soon at whatever the next Chesapeake Tree Canopy gathering is that we have. And we hope you'll share some thoughts in the chat before you sign off. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.